Just Amanda. She's Leah.
Yes.
No.
Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and get going since one of our guests has to. Good evening. I would like to call to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day, 2025. Thank you all for being here. Signed up to speak.
I don't.
We will start this meeting, as we do most of our meetings, inviting the public to join us for comment on any item on the agenda. We have two agenda items today. The first agenda item is our legislative 2025 Legislative Forum, and we have one of our state representatives with us, Representative and Majority Leader Monica Duran is here, and our other senator, we're hoping will join us tonight. And then we also have our second item is state land use legislation impacts on Wheat Ridge. And I have no members of the public signed up to speak, so we will move from that item and go to our first agenda item, and this is our legislative forum. And I want to welcome Majority Leader Monica Duran here. Let me make sure I got everybody in the right order. Who has to leave a little early this morning. So I want to give you an opportunity to address the council and the citizens that we have thousands that tune in on Channel 8 to hear what's going on here. And I know that everyone's excited about what you've got going on in the Capitol. So let me turn the microphone to you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here this evening, Mayor and Council. It's great to be here and see all of you. We're kind of starting to get in the thick of session, and really this is between now and the end, and getting ready for the budget is when things really start to pick up. It feels like it started earlier this session, at least a month earlier. I think many of the different impacts of the decisions that are happening federally are impacting us when we think about our budget. As you probably have heard, our budget is not in the best of places this session, and we are having to make some really hard decisions when it comes to services we may have to cut back on, things we're going to have to move dollars from one place to another. We have really stressed to every legislator to make sure that their bills have a zero impact, a fiscal impact, where we can, because we just don't know what to anticipate. We got the forecast today, which I haven't had an opportunity to dig into. You may have, Heather, a little bit. It didn't look, from what I'm hearing, that promising. But I think this is a time we need to be really mindful. We need to make sure that our most vulnerable who need the services will still get them. We may not be able to increase them, but we can still provide those. So we're having some tough conversations, and this isn't just the legislature. This is also, the governor's budget. He has to also look at those cuts. These cuts impact everybody. But we're excited. I think this is an opportunity for us to really kind of dig in and look through things and really figure out where can we save dollars, and how can we allocate them. So same thing we do at home, right? With our budgets, we look at them and figure out, okay, what do I need to cut back on? And it's just being thoughtful and mindful in a situation or at a time when we need to be. And we always try to look through that lens. So we're working on that. We've got a lot of big pieces of legislation coming. We've got legislation around healthcare, fees, swipe fees. I think that was heard last week. And just an array of things that pertaining to school finance, to healthcare, to housing, of course, and a lot of big, as I call them, rocks that we're going to be discussing. But really, I'm here to really hear from all of you, because I think this is an awesome opportunity to kind of hear locally what your challenges are, your questions that you have, because I know we don't always get to connect, and I don't always get to hear from you. So I just want to offer that I'm always available. You can reach me by text. My number has not changed in many years. So you can always text me. You can always call my office. You can always flag things for me. You can always tell me, yes, we support such and such policy. I really want to hear, and I really need to hear from you. So with that, I'm happy to either dig into some bills I'm running or just kind of answer questions and really hear from all of you.
What's your preference? We can do either
I'd really like to hear from
All right.
from council.
And you had also expressed an interest in, we have a new legislative committee.
Yes.
That's new, and you had expressed an interest in that. So what I'd like to do, just sort of in preparation for questions, would be to introduce our legislative committee. And I would like to, Cole Haslip is our staff liaison on that. Cole, would you say a few things about the committee and maybe introduce the committee members?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share about the Ledge Committee. So this year, the city adopted a comprehensive legislative advocacy program in an effort to get more involved in legislative advocacy as a whole. It consists of 4 parts, 4 components, the first of which is for the city council to adopt a legislative agenda, which is a broad strokes document saying what kind of bills the city would like to see in different areas like affordable housing, economic development, homelessness. Secondly, we've got our legislative committee consisting of the mayor, Councilor Hulteen, and Councilor Larson. And it's their responsibility to review legislation as it's introduced, to assess how it impacts municipalities, and consider whether or not a particular piece of legislation should move forward to the city council to consider adopting an advocacy position resolution. And then once those advocacy position resolutions are adopted, that initiates the lobbying process for staff. So that could be a variety of different activities, sending out letters to our legislators, hopefully engaging in some productive conversations, as well as, giving testimony at committee hearings and things like that. So that's our overview of our new initiative. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have, but I think it'd be best to turn it over to the chair of our legislative committee, Councilor Hulteen.
I want to go on record that Councilor Hulteen is the chair, Councilor Larson is the vice chair, and I'm just sort of along for the ride.
Our mayor is never along for the ride. He's right at the forefront. Thank you so much for being here. We're really grateful to have both of you and excited to share that we have really gotten more engaged in what happens under the dome. We've really recognized the last couple of years had I would say, generally good for our city, but occasionally things that have impacted us in ways that had we been at the table and used our voice more, either to engage and help direct the legislation or, to support or oppose, that it would better suit our community. So as Cole said, we have adopted our first ever legislative agenda and outlines the parameters of what's most important to us and what are the things we're going to give attention to. As you are both very familiar with, there's a lot going on at the Capitol. And so we, for us to take action, really want to make sure that the things we're contemplating have like a direct impact on the city. While in general we align with CML, there are times where either we're not in full alignment or there's specific amendments that really specifically impact our local economy or priorities. So to that end, we are kind of building it as we go. We met for the first time in December, so we I think have come a long way, and I think as was mentioned, we're going to be bringing forward our first 2 resolutions to this council a week from tonight. When we are supporting the construction defects and middle market housing bill. Last year at this legislative forum, we expressed our interest in really advancing middle housing, and the construction defects we feel really is something that's keeping the investments we'd like to see in Wheat Ridge, and that we've done a lot of policy work and partnership work to help make that happen here in our city. So we are in strong support for HB 25-1272 and look forward to continuing to engage with our legislature as that moves forward. We are very hopeful that that gets out in good shape at the end of this session. Our second bill that we are actually opposing is SB 25001. That was a really hard conversation for us because opposition of the bill is by no means an opposition to our deeply felt and deeply acted commitment to increasing access for people to use their civic voice, in particular voting. We feel we're in Jefferson County and Wheat Ridge in particular doing a really good job with that. We have some specific concerns about how it would impact both statewide, but in our own community, taking away some of our own control over local elections. And so we strongly support increasing access to voting, but we think this bill, there are just too many amendments that we were contemplating as we were looking at it. So we will continue to track it, and if the bill takes a different direction, we would certainly be open to supporting it with amendments, but right now it's just too many. Beyond that, we have a couple of other bills we're contemplating that impact our local economy and some of our other interactions with utilities. And we'll look forward to keeping you engaged with those as we move forward. And I just really want to thank everyone. Cole's fantastic. The mayor, of course, brings lots of depth of understanding, and Dan's inquisitive mind makes us dig deep into all of our work. So thank you so much, and we look forward to continuing working with you guys.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. This was exciting to hear. I can't tell you how helpful it is to have this committee, because this committee can alert both Senator Danielson and myself, like you just did, construction defects, it'll be in committee tomorrow, you're supportive. However, I had no idea that on the second bill, Senate Bill 1, that you were in opposition and didn't know, and it was good to learn why. That really helps me as I'm navigating on that floor and figuring out even where I personally will stand, and I want to represent my district to the best I can, and I know that we won't always align, and I know with CML, I don't always align, but I think we're always transparent and open and honest, but I am just really excited that you formed this committee and that it's going to move forward. You're going to be more engaged with us at the legislature, and I'm hoping reaching out, someone will reach out to say, you know, Majority Leader, Senator, we hear this bill's coming, here's our concerns, or you'll reach out. It's really great to hear from all of you, right? Or even if you come down to say, listen, we're here to testify against a particular piece of policy or for it. I just can't tell you how helpful that is out there. So I'm really excited about this. So thank you. And if there's anything I can do to help support or just provide you with, please let me know.
Please continue if you have some legislation you'd like to talk about.
I was going to talk about, I have quite a few, but we don't need to go through all of them. But wage theft was one that I had last year that, I wasn't aware early on the challenge that it was, or the challenge it was for all of you here, right? We had some conversations, Mayor, about that. Obviously, it was vetoed. We started working right away last interim to figure out a path forward, and we have a path forward. Obviously, it's in the top 10 bills this year, and we worked really closely with the governor's office, with our carpenters and other advocates. Senator Danielson is co-priming this in the Senate. So we've gotten to a really great place. It looks completely different than last year. It isn't just on construction, and it's not up the chain as we had it before. So I'm really proud of the work and the time that we all have put into this. It's been a labor of love, and we continue to work with other businesses to see other things we can kind of tweak. It's sitting in appropriations right now, and hopefully will be out fairly soon, and we'll get it through the House and then up to the Senate. So that's just an example of, we started working on this policy and had no idea the impact it was going to have until you brought it to my attention, and many others did, Mayor. So I appreciated that. So working on that, excited. We have a few others, but I think, I'm trying to think which ones might impact us locally here. But I can just lightly touch on some that I have coming. We are in the running for the Sundance Festival. You heard about that? We're in competition with, I think it is Cincinnati and Utah.
Right.
So we just got this off the floor. It should be on its way up to the Senate. And we really hope that we get this. This would be awesome revenue for our state. Yes, it would be housed out of Boulder, but with Boulder and people coming, they're obviously going to come to Denver and kind of spread wide. So I'm really proud of that piece and really see it as something that's really going to be positive for our economy. Let's see here. I don't know if you want to hear about the rest of these. I've got American Indian Affairs bill. It is ICWA. Senator Danielson is on that with me too. And we worked really closely with our two Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Ute tribes to really work at child welfare. Really complicated piece of legislation, but we got it out And it's just amazing, and now it's coming to you. And it's been a long time in the works. I think you brought this bill initially years ago, Senator Danielson, and really proud to be on this with you and to continue working on that. We've got several other gun safety bills that we are working on and have come through, and some that are waiting to come through. But other than that, there's 26 different pieces I have here, but I'd rather hear from all of you. But just know we are working, and I want to hear from Senator Danielson too, on policies when it comes to affordable housing, healthcare, school finance, right? Some environmental bills, and really some bills around public safety. So those were things that I heard at the door last year. That was really high regarding our communities, and really just trying to listen to our voters and constituents as to what they want. So with that, I'll kick it back over to you. And
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Are there questions for the majority leader on any of this legislation or other things that are happening down at the Capitol? Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this isn't specific to any bill. Several of us were in DC last week for the National League of Cities conference, and we heard from our state representatives and vice president, our senators, all that stuff. It doesn't feel like there's going to be a whole lot of federal money coming, and specifically maybe even specifically to Colorado. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit more about what you guys are doing in the state legislature to maybe think about that and what the budget will look like in the next couple of years?
Sure, thank you for that question. As you know, we're in a tough budget session. I think we were $1 billion short, and it's not because our economy isn't doing well. Our economy is doing well, but, you know, we have Tabor and we have federal cuts, so all of that is impacting. So right now, honestly, we are looking, JBC is looking at where we need to cut dollars and where we need to shift money. So the budget won't be coming until the long bill, I think it's week after next. And they're still working on those pieces. As I call them, they're kind of larger rocks when it comes to Medicaid, right? When it comes to school financing, when it comes to many things. So it is a tough time. And federally, things are changing daily, right? Different cuts are coming. We realized last year with Proposition KK, that you're probably familiar with, because we knew federal dollars had gone down from, I think it was about 50 million we used to get from the federal government for crime victims, slowly creeped down to 12 million. So last year, you know, we ran Proposition KK, which was an excise tax, 6.5% excise tax on guns and ammunition, but that strictly goes to crime victims because the funding isn't there. And we can't tell them, I'm sorry, the doors are closed. We can't help you. So we're looking at everything that we can to make sure that we can at least keep some of the services and provide those for our most vulnerable, right? When we're talking about meals, we're talking about school lunches, we're talking about so much. So we're working really hard. And we just got the forecast today, and I haven't had a chance to dig into it. Heather might have a little bit more information on that, but yeah, we just got it today, so I haven't been briefed on it. But just know that we are trying to be thoughtful and mindful of the decisions we make because we know that it impacts everyone in the state of Colorado.
I guess a follow-up to that, has there been any discussion what we heard the other day was actual threats of budget cuts or funding cuts because Colorado is a blue state or because we have certain policies or anything like that?
I haven't heard anything exactly. I don't know if Senator Danielson has. I haven't heard that.
Okay, thank you.
But if it's coming, I'm sure, you know, we will be aware.
Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I would add on to what the majority leader described. We are doing everything we can at the state legislature under the circumstances that we have to operate in. But I'd say the Trump-Musk administration is in a chaotic and cruel slash and burn mode where they're firing tens of thousands of people at will. They're cutting budgets, they're dismantling departments, all of that, and that they're negating their commitments to the states that have already been made. So I think we're seeing what you're seeing when you're seeing it, which is basically after it happens. It's a really, really dangerous place for our constituents, and I share your concerns. I think in addition to doing what we can at our local jurisdictions to try and, I don't know, to try and help, we're also speaking out and standing up. And I think we're seeing our constituents doing the same thing. The more and more that these cuts and departmental slashing, the firings, the mass layoffs, it's also part of my job. I'm seeing how to speak up and speak out and push back because our constituents deserve better. So we are committed to doing what we can, but then also speaking up loudly and saying this is not acceptable to our veterans or our federal workers or our friends and neighbors and family members right here in Wheat Ridge.
Thank you, and I think we all appreciate what you do in that regard. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just add too, that we are in communication with our federal delegation, with the AG's office, because obviously we want to make sure that the things we want to do when it comes to immigration or other protections we want to build upon, that we can, right? That we're able to do them and not creating even more issues down the road. So just know that we are in communication. We try and stay as connected as we can to know where those lines are and how we can help and however, we can help support locally too. But just know that we are communicating all together and trying to stay on top of this as much as we can.
Thank you. Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. One question I did have is on the construction defects law. And what I did want to ask is about kind of where that came about, because the wording on it that I'm seeing is that it says that if you cannot provide a warranty, the statute of limitations is increased to 10 years. And I don't know if this was for design professionals and construction or just construction, because the design professionals cannot warranty or guarantee anything. And so this would, I guess to them, it would increase it for architects, it would increase that statute of limitations to 10 years, which if the intent is to have more buy-in of those designers, increasing your length of liability doesn't necessarily help. And I didn't know if this was like specifically just for construction or was this for design professionals and construction?
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mayor. That's a great question, and I'd hate to assume what the bill sponsor's intent was and what it is. So I am sorry I can't answer that for you, but I'm happy to ask them. It is Representative Byrd and Representative Bosnacker at the House, and that's where the bill will be tomorrow in committee. So I'm happy to ask them, or if you want to email me questions over, I can share it with them. I'm just not as dug in on this piece of policy yet because it's just coming up. But those are great questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you. And I just really want to acknowledge and thank both of you. This is a crazy time with our federal government. And I know it must be incredibly crazy under the dome, trying to just keep a pace of it and trying to figure out how to thread the needle of both being attentive to your constituents while also not invoking the ire of a vindictive administration. So I just want to really appreciate that work. I think is hard for all of us right now. I want to be clear, I am not wearing my chair of the legislative committee hat with this comment. This is a bill that we will be discussing, but I have some concerns about HB 1220, which is the regulation of selling natural supplements, requiring licensure for people who advise and sell supplements. We are a grocery store economy in the city, and we have both the Natural Grocers and the Sprouts. So a considerable amount of our tax base is actually impacted by that decision. I do see it passed out of committee, 10 support, 3 against. So it is moving forward and will be in committee again on the 26th. And that is one we haven't had a chance to discuss at the legislative committee, but I've flagged it and have concerns about that economic impact. And we have grocery stores that sell a lot of supplements and people who depend on having access to people who can help them with that. And the licensure of that would really be a negative, create additional economic burden for one of our primary tax revenue sources in the city. So if you would keep that in consideration as that bill moves through, appreciate that.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for flagging that. I haven't heard the bill yet. I don't always know, they get introduced and they get assigned to committee, and then I get them after they come out of committee or out of finance. You said it's going to another committee. I'm assuming it's going to finance. It's going to appropriations.
House Health and Human Services.
That must have been the
It
first
was,
committee.
and now, today it was in House and Finance.
Okay, so now it goes to approps.
Yep. Sorry,
And
I have
we'll sit there.
bifocals, and when I look sideways at my computer, everything shifts a little bit.
No, thank you for the flag, and I will follow it. It's sitting in approps right now, so it's going to be a little bit before it comes to the floor for me. Thank you.
Additional questions from council, the Majority Leader? Why don't we give Majority Leader, we're going to give you a little break here. You don't have to leave quite yet, but we hope that, Senator Danielson, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thanks to all the council members for the invitation, and I just look forward to this each year. So for your time and attention, and anyway, for inviting us both here to participate in this meeting, and for everything you do for our city. It is a thankless job, I know, and we're really grateful to you. I will just speak briefly on a few things that I'm working on. A number of the problems that our constituents describe have to do with the basic difficulties in making the living wage. And to address a number of these concerns, we're starting right at the source. And that's with Senate Bill 5, which is the Worker Protection Act. This is a bill that I'm prime sponsoring, bringing forward with Senator Rodriguez in the Senate, and in the House, it's Assistant Majority Leader Bacon and Representative Mabry. In Colorado, we have a antiquated law that was about 81 years old, pretty much designed to keep people from unionizing. And what it does is after we hold the federally required first election in an effort to unionize, after workers have already decided to do that, then they must hold then a second election, which is really burdensome and completely arbitrary. But to pass that threshold, you have to get a 75% vote. So the impact that this second election has on workers who are considering whether or not to enter into a union contract, it's just very intimidating, because they understand how difficult it is to reach that 75% threshold. So it really prevents a lot of workers from even considering this kind of action. What we want to do is really simple. We want to take away the second election. That's it. So we're the only state in the country that has this system. We want to eliminate this kind of burdensome barrier that the state of Colorado is actually putting on the workers. If they've decided that a union contract is the way they want to proceed, the state of Colorado should step away, remove this barrier, and let them do what they want to do. So that's one of my main priority bills, and a priority of the Senate and the House. And I will also say, of our broad Colorado community, the support for unions is at an all-time high, I mean, rivaled only by the post-war sentiment. People understand that the way forward for better wages, better benefits, and safety on the job oftentimes means a union contract, unless you're lucky enough to work with a business, which many do, who provide these things to their workers without, a union being part of it. So responding to the demands of our electorate following an election where they made it very clear that they need politicians to do better by workers, we're moving forward with Senate Bill 5. And the response in the community has been overwhelmingly positive. So it's been a great thing to be part of. I hope we have success. I know we'll have success in the legislature. The governor is just quite not as on board as I think his constituents wish him to be. But we're still working with the office, always do, and the proponents to try and earn his support. I'm joining Majority Leader Duran on a number of measures that she already mentioned, so I'm not going to go into them again. you can look up our legislative pages and feel free to contact me in addition to the majority leader when we're co-priming the same pieces of legislation. I'm also carrying some more legislation when it comes to the Native community. In the past, the majority leader is right. I've passed bills to eliminate the use of racist mascots, to establish the Office of Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives, to allow for Native graduates to wear regalia in their ceremonies, the Indian Child Welfare Act, land annexation, and so we've built a very strong relationship in the last few years, not just with the Ute Mountain and the Southern Ute in the southwest corner of the state, but the broader Native community. There's over 210,000 Native people that live in our state, so working alongside the entire community there. So this year, I'm doing a couple of measures that the majority leader mentioned, and then also one reclassifying bison as wildlife. And this is an interesting intersection of support that I didn't anticipate, because I was doing this on behalf of the Native community, but then of course conservation community also supports. So it's been, again, a real positive thing where folks are on their own, very grassroots, generating support for what I did not anticipate to be such a popular measure. And then also working on a measure to allow for the state to recognize tribal court orders and commitment orders and that kind of thing. So, piece by piece, breaking down some problems that we have as the state of Colorado and how we need to work towards a better government-to-government relationship with both of the Ute tribes, and then better serve the Native community across the state. I'm also working on a gun violence prevention measure to further strengthen the laws around gun shows. The ceasefire, Colorado has been focused on this ever since Columbine and closing those loopholes with gun shows. There's a little bit more work we could do, so taking a look at that. And again, I know that none of these things will solve gun violence, the public health crisis that is gun violence. But piece by piece, we can help save the lives of our friends and neighbors across the state. So this is another step in that effort. And again, the majority leader has been an excellent leader on gun violence prevention. I'll be doing one measure with the disability community to kind of improve voc rehab. And then the other kind of major piece of legislation that I'm bringing forward again this year is the Child Sexual Abuse Accountability Amendment. I think we discussed this last year. Referring to the ballot, a measure that would allow for survivors of childhood sexual abuse to pursue claims against their abusers no matter when it happened. Seemed like a pretty easy thing to support. 87% or 86% of the state voters supported it, but the 12 Republicans in the Senate did not. So we are going to move forward, since even though the math didn't change, there are a few new individuals in the Senate. Give them the chance to do the right thing and respond to the needs of their community. After all, we're talking about childhood survivors of sexual abuse. So hopefully we can gain the support we need to refer to the ballot this year. If not, the coalition of supporters and the survivor community, leaders like Majority Leader Duran and we have steps to take to get it on the ballot through signature gathering that I hope we don't have to pursue, but if that's the reality, so be it. And those are kind of the things that I'm focused on this year. I'd love to take any questions about that. And if I can't answer them, much like the majority leader, and also she's carrying that too. We do, I suppose, partner together pretty frequently. But you're very lucky, people of Wheat Ridge, to have the majority leader as your state representative. I know I am. I feel very lucky. So it's no coincidence that we partner together. I trust and admire her work. So I suppose that's why we end up on a lot of things, because we enjoy working together and she does a lot of hard work. So thank you again. And like I said, Mr. Mayor, if there are questions, happy to try to answer.
Okay, thank you very much. I know the time is just after 7 and you had a hard stop. I would love to have you stay if you can, but I want to say thank you very much for coming. I want to say thank you very much for your work in stakeholding in the 001. I think it was very, it's been made for a much better piece of legislation. And and we've got still some good challenges ahead, but I enjoy your work on our behalf. So thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you for your work as majority leader and your work in the House for the citizens of the district that you represent.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I do really enjoy this dialogue because I really feel connected to my district. So thank you for the opportunity to come here. Thank you for Senator Danielson and I do align a lot on many different pieces of policy, and it's just really helpful to have that support up in the Senate. So thank you. And please don't hesitate. Keep me up to date on those bills. I will follow this one that's going to be in approps that you mentioned. And just thank you so much. It's just an honor to serve Wheat Ridge, and so happy that you have this new committee formed. It's just going to be much better dialogue between us and you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're
Have a good evening. Now, we'll turn to questions for Senator Danielson. Senator, I'm going to go back to 005 because we may differ on that. And I want to understand that in the second election, that's really an election to entitle the employer to mandate the withholding of union dues or fees in connection with the union organization.
Well, no, not exactly. So basically all this, that the second election, there is no real purpose for it. You have to have that second election in order to even authorize the union contract. So you don't even have a bargaining team. There's no specifics anywhere yet. The union effort cannot proceed without the second election. So I know there's a lot of misinformation, and the business lobby has been staunchly opposed from the beginning, which is not a surprise given the content. Mm-hmm. There are a number of businesses, individual businesses and business owners who understand that they are not threatened by the ability for workers to unionize because they treat their workers fairly and they pay them well, and it doesn't hurt them in any way to authorize others to form a union. However, there is a lot of misinformation coming from the lobby about what the bill does. And then that misinformation is actually being repeated by the governor. And we've seen this on TV and in the paper. And so the details of any union contract are not determined in this second election. This is just another hurdle to get over before you begin the work. And so I think you all know that no worker is mandated to pay dues, although the union is mandated to represent every worker. So, like I said, there's a lot of misinformation about what removing that second election actually does. It's just the state of Colorado invented it a long time ago, and we are solo in its implementation. So not exactly is the short answer. Okay. It really comes down, this is the basics of a collective bargaining measure. Those who oppose the ability for workers to collectively bargain, it does not surprise me if they align against this bill. Those who support the basics of collective bargaining, it does not surprise me that they join the lengthy list of proponents. So, and when I say proponents, it's not just the unions. Yes, the unions are 100% on board, even though it won't impact their membership. They just are standing in solidarity with the rest of the workers in the state of Colorado who may choose to do this and who may benefit from winning an election like this. When I say the rest of the community, this is religious organizations and voting rights organizations and youth organizations, community service providers, community health care providers, mental health care providers. You name it, basically any nonprofit that operates in Jeffco and across the state that provides some kind of a service. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them are on board because, again, they understand that when workers do better, the whole well-being of the economy and the community is lifted up. So again, a group like Cobalt, which advocates for reproductive health care. They're on board because they understand that when women and their families have a better and more secure economic environment, their health care improves. It's really basic about supporting workers who wish to collectively bargain in order to improve their workplace and their pay and the safety on the job and their benefits. That's what Senate Bill 5 is really about. All of those details come after the union contract authorization occurs, which, of course, for many is not possible under the current system. You probably heard, and I'm sorry, you probably heard over and over the grand compromise. We want to keep the status quo. Well, it's not a grand compromise. It works for business owners and corporations. And it, right now, there is no compromise. It's really just the workers giving. So if the business lobby had come to the table with a reasonable, some kind of a compromise on this really simple measure, we've been doors open, listening and waiting for months. We started circulating these documents back in September and October. So far there has not been a good faith effort to compromise, but I don't say this is a grand compromise. This is an 81-year-old law that was designed to bust unions. And that's no longer the will of the people. That doesn't reflect what the people in Jeffco or across the state want anymore. That is a one-sided policy that the status quo does benefit a number of business owners and, corporations. But the vast majority of workers are not thriving under this. That's why we need to remove this.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time? Councillor Hulteen.
Thank you, Mayor Stricker. Thank you, Senator. I think you were here earlier when we said that we are going to be coming forward in support of the construction defect law, the HB 1272. And I know last year when we were talking about last year's version of the bill that you were not in support of last year's. And I would just be interested in hearing your thoughts on this year's version of the bill.
Thanks. I'm so used to being recognized in a formal way. I'm waiting for someone to say, Senator Danielson. Thank you. So I think what I'd say is always open to changes. My primary goal is consumer protection. And in this day, I think Mr. Mayor Pro Tem pointed out a good question that hits on a number of levels. Not just the cuts and everything that I talked about before, but they're dismantling the Consumer Protection Department. So we have, again, a federal government that is attacking the folks who are supposed to look out for us, dismantling, piece by piece by piece in an intentional and rapid and chaotic way, an entire department that is set up to protect us, the consumer. I have to be mindful of these things when we go into a session like this in a way that we maybe never had to before. So if I'm not sure how the bill will shift and change. So, I think I've made it clear before why I've had to, maybe like Mr. Mayor said, that we may not see eye to eye, and this might be a place where that happens again. But I also want to give it time. So as Madam Majority Leader said, I believe it's in committee in the House, so we can see how it shifts. But if I opposed something like this, it would be because, in my opinion, or in the opinion of our constituents, I, like you, monitor the communication coming in from the grassroots. What do our constituents need and want us to do in a time where we're all trying to address a lack of affordable housing? Is this the way, or is there a better way that doesn't compromise our consumer protections? So I think I'll see how it comes from the House. And then, much like Madam Majority Leader said, we can visit again. And I know you've got great lobbyists in the Capitol, but also feel free to call my cell phone and or reach to my office directly, and we can look again. But I don't want to ever mislead you or any of our constituents that I supported at this time, or that I will vote yes, but I'm always going to listen. So that would be my main concern.
Thank you. Pardon me, any other further questions right now for the Senator? Thank you very much, Senator.
Well, again, just you have my gratitude for your service and for your work here and at the legislature.
You're welcome to stay, or we're going to have Heather with CML is going to lay down their some of their things. If you've got time, we'd love you to stay.
Thanks, folks. I have a sick 3-year-old, and I have about 15, 20 minutes. If that's helpful, I would love to listen. If you don't mind if I have to leave before you finish, if that's okay.
I think that'll be fine.
And then the legislative committee, please feel free or have Heather just sort of summarize. I get CML communication, don't get me wrong, they do a great job. But I'm also interested in Wheat Ridge and what Wheat Ridge wants. So I know she'll get me a summary, but please don't hesitate to do the same. I got the 2 and 3 bills that you're prioritizing right now. So thank you for forgiving me an early departure, but I will do my homework to catch up. Good. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you
all.
very much. With that, we'll go to Heather Stauffer. Let's see, you're the principal advocate down at the CML and does a great job down there for the city and for cities around the state of Colorado. So Heather, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Starker. I appreciate that. And to Senator Danielson's point, we always want to communicate what Wheat Ridge's position is, but there's no substitute for hearing directly from you guys. So we absolutely encourage all of you to reach out to your senators and representatives directly as well. I think Madam Majority Leader alluded to this, but it's going to be a tough budget session. All eyes are on the budget this year, and it's going to determine a lot of the legislation that we see. We did just get a new economic revenue forecast, and it's not looking great. Haven't delved into the details, but yeah, just generally not looking very positive right now. The JBC is going to try to cut $1.2 billion from the budget. For reference, the state budget last year, I believe, was around $40 billion. So it's a pretty big cut from a state budget. I believe they have about $12 million that they still need to find cuts somewhere for. So what that means for us as municipalities, what things we're looking at, obviously we want to make sure that the programs that we benefit from the state, if we receive state funding, are not cut too deeply. Also, we want to be mindful of programs, the temptation for perhaps the legislature to push down the costs onto local governments if the state can't pay for it. The state has the ability to put fiscal notes on bills, which Senator Danielson, we're all very familiar with. And so the state has to be able to fund those bills if it impacts state programs. We don't have the same ability from the municipal and local government perspective. We do have a line on those fiscal note sheets. However, it's just, to give people an idea, the state doesn't have to fund us for those programs. So definitely keeping our eyes out for those costs being pushed down to locals. So that's something that we'll just make sure that we're looking at. 2 programs we're watching specifically from the budget, severance tax. This has got a huge target on it this year. The governor's budget proposed moving $20 million from severance tax revenues to the general fund to help balance the budget. This isn't the first time that the General Assembly has swept severance tax dollars. Those severance tax dollars, a portion of them that go into the local government severance tax fund, are used for those energy and mineral impact grants. So that's roads and bridges, that's water projects, a lot of times community, any kind of community program, they're pretty flexible. So unfortunately, they do have a pretty big target on them this year. We did just receive in the updated economic forecast, severance tax is going to be really, really, really down this year. So I'm not even sure if there's going to be any money going through. So we'll see how that impacts everything. And then the First Appearance Grant Program, that's a program through DOLA that reimburses the cost of first appearance for courts, municipal courts. So we know that program is also on the chopping block. We're hoping that we can at least save the structure of that program and in order to build upon it in future years. But those are 2 programs in particular that we're watching for the budget this year. I did want to just mention the construction defects in middle market housing, 1272. That is something that we're also supporting. We're going to be in committee tomorrow testifying in support of it. We're hoping that that comes out of committee, and we'll be supporting it all the way through. So I'm happy to bring any kind of messages from the Legislative Council as much as you would like. I don't know if you guys are having anybody come to testify tomorrow, or there's plenty of other opportunities to testify as well. So that is one that we're looking at as well. I did want to mention, I'll just mention a couple, and then I'm happy to answer questions on anything that you guys have. One of the bills that we're looking at that was in the Senate today is the House Bill 1056. This is the local government wireless permitting bill. This is being brought by AT&T. And it really is an attempt to bypass local permitting for cell phone towers. And what they'd like to do is they would like to move the shot clocks down from 150 days, I believe it is the current federal requirement, to about 90 to 120 days. There's also deemed approved language in there. So if we don't permit within that time frame, the permit is just deemed approved. So we obviously have a lot of concerns about this. Our lobbyists were able to get an amendment on today on the Senate floor, which we were pretty happy about. But that is one that will be heard on third reading and final passage tomorrow. So, just letting you guys know, just in case you want to talk to your senator about it. Just put a plug.
The 120 days.
It does have the 120 days still in it. However, the tolling language, we got an amendment on the tolling language, which don't ask me what that is because I don't know.
Is it okay? Wow. Senator's here. If Lauren speaks to this maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think generally speaking, we've amended our code maybe 2 or 3 times in my 15 years here to comply with existing state or federal regulations that already give us a time clock. So from an applicant standpoint, the best application to submit in Wheat Ridge is telecom because it's very predictable. We have a shot clock for every type of telecom, building mounted, roof mounted, or freestanding. No other customer of any kind, housing, affordable or otherwise, gets that predictability. So, the only discretion we have in our code as it relates to telecom is when it's a new freestanding facility that's not co-locating. We've never denied one. It's always just to make sure it's a large tower that's context sensitive. So we've not had any challenges or complaints. We actually are the leaseholder. We have tenants here at City Hall on our tower. I would say the negotiation of the lease is more time consuming than the permit or the entitlement process. So, I feel confident in saying that our current requirements, as they comply with current state and federal law, are providing what's needed for our telecom customers.
Yeah, and I'll just add that this is a bill, I believe, that they're running across the country. So they have not been able to provide us any actual examples of problems that they're having with permitting with local governments. It's really just kind of a nuisance that they would like to get rid of, it seems. So hoping
Didn't
that
that bill come from the interim committee?
it did, yeah.
So
yeah.
I think the sponsors bring the bill. I mean, this is Senator Henriksen from Pueblo and Senator Roberts he represents a lot of the rural districts up in the mountain corridor and the I-70 corridor and up into the northwestern part of the state. And so they have obligations to their rural customers. And I grew up in northeastern Weld County. I know what it's like to lag behind in terms of communications. When I tell people that we had a party line, a lot of people don't even know what that is. Thank goodness, right?
Sure.
I know my ring. So the sponsors will say, again, this is their effort to bring connectivity, et cetera, to their constituents. And,
You bet.
it's, again, like I said, I know something about that. And so that's why they're bringing this. I heard the debate today. So, that's sort of the balance that we're asked to strike.
Yeah. And connectivity was something that we did talk about, and obviously we want to increase coverage. I think we're just concerned that this doesn't actually increase coverage in the areas that need it. So that was one factor for sure in our conversations at CML about the bill. So I wanted to just mention Voting Rights Act as well, because you had brought that up. And I think Councilwoman Hulteen said it really well. The bill, we're actually in an amend position on that bill. We have some major concerns about the application of the bill. Obviously, we don't want to see any voter suppression or prerequisites to voting or running for office in our communities, and I don't think that we have in Colorado in our municipal elections. The application to municipalities, and particularly home rule municipalities, we believe is unconstitutional. We do have about 113 years of case law to say that municipalities have control over all matters of their local elections. And it's very clear to us, I think, that the bill is looking to change specific policies via litigation. So I think that if the General Assembly wanted to run a ballot initiative or referred measure to change the dates of elections, if they felt like all elections should be held in November and we shouldn't have our spring elections, they should do that through changing the Constitution rather than placing a large amount of liability on the backs of local governments to potentially defend these kinds of claims. Colorado Springs had defended a Voting Rights Act on the federal level claim a few years ago, and it cost the city about hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think they're actually into the millions of dollars right now, and they were found to have no standing. So that claim against them was unsuccessful. We have not seen any successful Voting Rights Act claims on the municipal level. So I think that that's one of the concerns that we have with that bill specifically. And we're asking that if the state wants to apply this to the state and counties as arms of the state, that seems appropriate. But for our home rule communities, we should not be part of this bill. So we're asking that municipalities be carved out. We are working with the proponents on some more practical technical changes as well that we're hoping to see in amendments as well. So that's kind of where we're at with that one. That bill is currently passed out of the Senate Local Government Committee and is in the Appropriations Committee waiting. It will probably wait until after the budget, which will be in a couple weeks, first week of April. So we'll start seeing a whole bunch of bills pass through appropriations after they decide on the budget. So that's one that we're watching as well. I did just want to mention House Bill 1169. This is Yes in God's Backyard. This may be one that's on your radar as well, but it would allow churches and schools to use an administrative approval process for residential development on land that they own rather than going through a local government permitting process. I think that is concerning to us, just the broad nature of the bill, and we're continuing to work with the proponents on that. I think that just without any guardrails around it, it's kind of ripe for abuse. You can be considered a church very easily. We see lots of different, churches, the Church of Cannabis, the Church of, there's tons of churches, and you really just need to own a piece of land for 5 years and you can rezone it and then you can sell it to a developer. So we want to make sure that it's not being abused and that there are proper safeguards around that for sure. There's also some questions around if churches own land and are building condos and housing, are they subject to anti-discrimination claims the same as others as well? So that's some guardrails that we're looking to ensure. So I'm happy to go through any other bills that you guys have questions on. I did want to just put in a plug for our bill that we're running, our CML initiated House Bill 1276. This is court actions related to failures to appear in court. What we're seeing in a lot of communities, and we heard from our policy committee, is that we have a lot of failure to appear. So people will get arrested, they will be bonded out, and then they will fail to appear in court, and they will go and they will commit another low-level offense, and they will kind of continue this cycle. And so we are looking to kind of put some parameters around that to say that if you have committed a certain number of offenses and failed to appear, that a judge has the discretion to issue a PR bond to ensure that your case is then closed and that you can begin that process. So that is currently in the House. We're waiting to go through the House Judiciary Committee. We're hopeful, but it's obviously going to be an uphill battle a little bit. So we're working with the committee members to kind of make any changes that to ensure that that gets out of committee. So more to come on that one for sure. And then, yeah,
Okay,
and I'm happy to answer any questions. you
okay.
guys have.
We have Judge Lucero here with us today. Judge, thank you very much for joining us.
That you just mentioned. Did I hear it correctly that after a certain number of FTAs that the judge would then have the discretion to issue a personal recognizance bond, or did you mean a secured bond?
I think I meant a secure bond.
Okay.
I apologize. Yeah. I'm not up on my terminology, so I apologize.
That's what I thought. I just wanted
Yeah.
to make sure on that. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Sorry.
So questions from council on this legislation or others that you may want to talk with Heather about?
Mayor?
Yes.
Anybody else? Heather, we talked about this a little bit, but the electric fence detection system, has that been scheduled in the Senate committee yet? or-
That has not been scheduled quite yet. I am talking to members of the committee. So that bill is coming from an electric fence security company. We saw it last year from the same security company. It died in the Senate Local Government Committee. This year, they've tooled it a little bit to sound very, very permissive, but essentially it's the same idea that local governments would not be able to permit these specific electric fences in their community, which we feel is like totally inappropriate. I am talking to members of the Senate committee. I feel pretty good about the odds of it dying there, but I don't want to say anything right now. But if that does get to the floor, definitely going to come talk to Senator Danielson as well.
Senator, I did send you an email with some background
Yeah.
on that if your staff
Yeah.
got back to me. But just for council's background on that, I think the bill was probably introduced because of Wheat Ridge, one of the cities. This was the same company out of South Carolina
Yeah.
that was working with a local business in Wheat Ridge that wanted to put up an electric fence right next to an elementary school. We eventually allowed it, but we required a special use permit process so that those issues with the concerns about electric fence next to an elementary school could be addressed, and they addressed them. But so we don't believe that this should be just allowed anywhere in the community. I know it was amended, so now it's only in industrial and commercial.
Yeah, it was amended, residential was amended out, so it only would apply to commercial and mixed use, I guess was not specifically called out, but,
And this one would still be, I think, it was for Camping World on the frontage road. They were having security issues, so we wanted to work with them. But again, it was shares a border with an elementary school. And they wanted to put electric fence up right where the kids were playing.
yeah.
And we didn't feel that was 100% appropriate at the time. And
Yeah.
I think the city should have some say on where these go. So.
Yeah, that's become a perennial
And
bill.
you have an
that-
email with this more background, so.
I'm hoping that we won't have to come talk to you about it. Maybe it'll just go away, but. That's going to be Senator Kirkmeyer and Senator Mollica. So I'm talking to them for sure.
Heather, I had another one here that has some local interest in Golden, HB 1039, commercial vehicle muffler requirements.
Yes.
And it looks like CML is supporting that. You have,
We are supporting that. That did come from the city of Golden, and they're very concerned about their ability to, I think it allows you to, let me just really quick remind myself, it's been a little while. It requires all commercial vehicles to have a muffler, and it must be visible so you can inspect it. And then, sorry, And it has to be available for inspection by a peace officer. So right now, I believe that you cannot pull over a commercial vehicle only for muffler issues or noise. And I think that this bill would allow a peace officer to pull someone over for muffler noise. So that is one that we are supportive of. I believe that it is possibly, is it in appropriations? I will find out where it is, but
Okay.
I haven't heard any issues with that one, so I
Okay,
think it's
good. I
moving
thought it was
forward.
reasonably popular
Yeah.
in the thing. Another one was HB 1164, which was constitutional carry of handguns. Had a lot of conversation around it, and I believe CML is opposed to that piece of legislation.
Yes, so that one, I just want to make sure on my bill list.
And it seemed like
Yes.
that one sort of contained a lot of possible liability for municipalities.
So it would actually, yes, so that actually died in committee on the 24th.
Oh,
So
okay. I
that
guess I
one,
see it in here,
Yep.
PI'd there.
that was PI'd, so
So-
we don't even have to worry about it.
Okay,
Check that
well.
one off the list.
Enough to worry about, I'm sure. Any others that anyone has an idea to talk to our senator who is here, or Bev with CML? It's always great to have you guys come, and we appreciate your time. I know happens at always a busy time in the legislature, you know, it's always better after May gets, mid-May.
Yeah, and I'll just mention, if you guys don't get our State House report, that comes out every week, and it just details what we're working on that week and what we expect. So that's some good information if you want to stay up to date with what we're doing over at CML.
Bev, question for you. What is CML's position regarding the live streaming of municipal courts?
So that's part of House Bill 1147, I believe. We're working with the proponents on that bill on amendments, and I don't have them in front of me, but I'm happy to have Jeremy follow up with you on exactly what we're seeking on that. There was certainly legislation a few years ago that detailed when you have to have live streaming in municipal court, and when you don't. And I think that we were very cognizant of the fact that not all municipal courts have the budget to be able to live stream and to pay for a staff member to do that live streaming. So that's something that we're working with the proponents on figuring out. I think they want live streaming specifically in cases where there may be jail time involved. More to come on that. But the other provisions of that bill were really focused on the sentence parity with the state. I think that's the piece of that bill that we're really concerned about. And it's, we just changed our position from amend. We didn't get the amendments that we wanted on that second specific piece. So now we are officially in a opposed position on that bill. Yep.
If I had one or two more. SB 077, modifications to the Colorado
Yes.
Open Records Act, and that impacts our clerk and our city operations, and it looks like that presents more challenges to our city.
Okay, so Senate Bill 77 is one that we are supporting. We felt like it made a lot of changes that were helpful for clerks, but I'm happy to take feedback if you feel like it would be impactful. So the bill changes the record response time from 3 days to 5 days for clerks, and makes some changes around kind of the extenuating circumstances that would allow for more time for record responses for Cora. So that was one that we were supportive of. It passed out of the House committee, and it's waiting, I believe that's the second committee. It's coming from Senator Kipp. So now it's in the House. It's waiting to be heard on the House floor now. So if there are concerns about that bill, I'm happy to hear them.
No, I had you down for an amend position on that one,
Got
and
it.
I didn't know whether they had accepted the amendments.
We, our policy committee asked us to take an amend, I'm sorry, we are not supportive. We are in an amend position. Thank you for
Okay.
the reminder. And the amendment that we were seeking is just, it made some exemptions for media. So media continues to have a 3 day response time, and we felt like the media shouldn't be placed at a higher level than other constituents' responses or response time. So we were going to seek that exemption be taken out of the bill. So we are continuing to have those conversations.
And maybe a softball before we close, hopefully.
Awesome.
SB 163, the battery stewardship programs.
Well, hang on,
Okay.
because I need to remind myself what that is.
Okay.
Battery Stewardship Program, that is a support bill that we have. And let me just remind myself. The disposal of certain batteries. Yes. So this is, let's see. Yes, Senator Cutter, and she is creating battery stewardship plan for the collection, transportation, processing of recycling of certain batteries. So this goes along with bills that we have been supportive of in the past around recycling enterprises, things like that in the state. So we felt like this was a natural kind of add-on and provided some benefit to local governments. I don't know if that's passed. Let's see. I don't think that's been heard in committee yet. So that'll be heard in the Senate Health and Human Services Committee.
Okay. Well, I think it's been very positive in the paint recycling program. I had to dispose of a battery today, and our city has a disposal, but I'm term limited, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do in December after that for my batteries. So
You have to pass them off
hopefully
to
we can move that through the process. So is there anything else that the council would like to discuss on our legislative forum? And once again, I really appreciate you all coming today and giving us this update. Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being here. Senator, always a pleasure. You're good. You're good. You're good to go.
Again, thank you all so much. Please don't hesitate to reach out, or better yet, come and visit us at the Capitol. You would brighten up the building just by walking into it. And that goes for your constituents too. I have a number of school children coming and visiting, a number of just community members, and just remind folks that the building belongs to them. We work for them. You guys are my boss, actually. And so we want to be open and available to everybody who lives here and across the state. So thanks again, folks. I hope to see you all real soon.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Heather. Appreciate it. Yep. Yeah, you too. Hang in there. Yeah, yeah. Appreciate you coming out every year.
Anytime. I think I told you, I'm like 10 minutes away.
Oh, that's right.
I'm in
Yeah.
Arvada, so
Oh,
this
yeah.
is
It's on your way home.
It's so easy. Like, I might go pick up dinner, bring it
Yeah.
home, you know.
Nice.
Way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will let you know about electric.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how big of a deal it is to us at this point.
Yeah.
It just pisses me off, the company.
Well, that's how I
Right.
feel.
It's
Is it,
everybody should
is
feel
it
that.
like the most impactful bill that we have this year?
Yeah.
No, but it's almost like a personal vendetta of mine now.
They were,
They were awful, right? Yeah. That is what everyone has said
Yeah.
about this company.
No.
And I'm like,
that's fun. Yeah, I mean,
I cannot let it go.
because it's about their profits. That's all they care about.
And their house sponsor.
Yeah.
Their house representative referred to them, like, so many times. Oh, this won't change anything for local government. So I'm like, you know what? If this passes, I'm just going to tell everybody to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Because we have
Yeah.
on the record
Yeah. Yeah.
their legislators saying that they're
Won't change anything.
doing so.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you
it.
so
All right. Yep. Have a great night. Good night. It's fun too. I just figured that out. You get phone? No, I didn't.
Nonetheless,
I actually pulled in. Amanda, have you heard from Amanda?
okay.
I'm here. I've been here.
Oh.
I don't know if anybody can hear or see me, but I am here.
We can hear you.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, let us reconvene. And we will now move into our second order of business, and this is the state land use legislation and the impacts to Wheat Ridge. And I'll turn it over to our city manager, Mr. Gall.
Thank you. I'll turn it right to Lauren. She's going to introduce it, and we have Scott and our attorney here as well.
Thank
Excellent.
you. I just beach balled my computer. There we go. Okay, so shifting gears in our time machine to last year, we are now in the moment where we are implementing some of last year's legislation. It was a very dynamic legislative session in 2024. The dust has settled, and each bill that impacted local land use has had a slightly different timeline associated with it. I would say maybe at sort of the highest global level, Wheat Ridge is largely in alignment with a lot of the state's goals and many of their provisions. So we do have some deviations. That's what we're here to talk about tonight, but not too many, thankfully. In your memo tonight, Scott did the heavy lifting on this. We worked with Mr. Dahl, our city attorney, on some of these to make sure we were heading down the right track. We have 5 bills summarized in your memo. The first 2 are not really up for discussion tonight, landscaping and transit supportive densities, for 2 sort of different reasons. We were tracking the state legislation on landscaping when we did the Waterwise Code Amendment, so we're pretty well aligned on that topic. And then as it relates to transit supportive densities, that is a much longer timeline. That's related to housing, particularly on our transit corridors. We're in good shape for much of that bill, and then still digesting the other pieces and working with the Department of Local Affairs. So we'll come back to you later this year to talk about 1313. So the primary purpose of tonight is 3 topics, 3 very discrete topics: residential occupancy limits, parking for multi-unit development, and accessory dwelling units. Because they are 3 very unrelated topics, our proposal and our plan for tonight is to discuss one topic at a time. Scott will discuss the implications and our recommendations. We'll answer your questions and request consensus on that individual topic before we move on to the next topic. So with that, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, so I'll briefly go over the landscaping and TOC's bill, and then give some more background on kind of the general gist of these bills, and talking about statewide concern a little bit as well. So yeah, like Lauren said, the landscaping practices for water conservation, that actually takes effect in January of 2026, but we were so ahead of it. The Waterwise ordinance that was passed last year was modified to be in compliance with those regulations for the most part. There are a couple things that we realized kind of after the fact that need to be tweaked or aren't quite working, but nothing substantial. And actually, some of those we actually modified as part of the conforming amendments when council passed the mixed-use Lutheran Legacy Campus regulations. So we're just going to go through the code one more time and make sure everything's there. And then just some kind of technical things about how we calculate landscaping need to be clarified. But again, nothing substantial. We'll bring those forward at some point to you as part of a code cleanup ordinance, or if we can package everything together, we'll put those in there as well. For TOCs, the Transit-Oriented Communities Bill, HB 24-1313, the bill actually takes effect in June of this year, but our detailed reporting is not actually due until December of 2026. So we've got some time there. The state is also releasing guidance on this bill a lot more slowly than the other ones, so we don't have as good of direction how this might impact Wheat Ridge. I think there's some news articles out there and some stories about how people think it might impact them, but we don't actually totally know yet. So more to come on this, likely later this year or early next year. So I'll go ahead and go back to the background. The memo is organized by bill. I'm going to kind of talk about what the bill does, and then give a little discussion and staff's input on how the bill may or may not impact Wheat Ridge. And then at the end, we have some recommendations based on both getting into compliance with state law, but also just kind of our general recommendations for how this type of topic probably should be addressed in our code. Wheat Ridge is a home rule city, municipality, and then House bills kind of are split between, state bills are split between local, mixed, and statewide concern. I don't want to go through everything in here, but I do want to mention that all bills discussed within this memo are categorized as mixed concern, meaning that there's some local legislation basically coexists with the state legislation so long that it does not permit what the state legislation prohibits. So again, it's kind of a mix. I think a lot of these actually started out as more strongly written and possibly statewide concern, and through some lobbying efforts, both from Wheat Ridge and CML, they've been watered down a bit to be more of these mixed concern. So with that, you can kind of get into this, all those paragraphs that our city attorney wrote on local control. So I'll go ahead and dive right into HB 24-1007, which is the residential occupancy limits. Good to go? All right, let's do it. So this bill is really simple. I think it was less than a page. It prohibits municipalities from limiting the number of people who may live together in a single dwelling unit based on familial relationships and whether or not they are related. Occupancy can still be regulated based on health and safety standards such as building codes or fire codes or any applicable affordable housing program guidelines. This bill actually took effect right away in July of 2024. And as part of getting into compliance with that bill, ballot measure 2B was approved by the Wheat Ridge voters in November 2024. One of those changes was actually to remove family unit and the number from the charter in anticipation of potential future changes to the city code. So that was passed and approved and done, and that put the city charter in compliance with the statewide legislation. But other portions of the code, notably the zoning code that reference family units, were not updated. This one, we don't actually have a lot of discussion because our charter is now in compliance and we did get voter approval, but we will need to modify the definition of family, congregate care home, and our occupancy limit section to remove that numeric limit and rely instead on building code standards and health and safety standards, just to ensure that the zoning code matches the approved charter amendment. I think Lauren knows this probably better than anyone here. It was a real challenge to enforce occupancy limits. I think that's a big reason why we don't feel like there's any, staff doesn't have any concerns with this getting removed from our code. It's nearly impossible to enforce and caused code enforcement a lot of issues. So we're asking whether council agrees with our approach on this bill and to revise the code to match the city charter.
And we made some changes, to the charter. I think we used household. We got away from who are you related to? And if you show up, play the advocacy tape for it. Do you want to show up at the house and say, well, now, are you related to this person or not? And that's just not a role the city has ever been in, ever wants to be in. Similarly, almost every city until this bill had the classic, okay, any number of related family members, but no more than 5 unrelated persons. Similarly, you show up on the front door and say, okay, how many of you are living here and are you related or not? Not a useful standard. And we found, and other cities have found, that it's just not that difficult at all to shift to describing households and saying what we really are concerned with here is residential safety and occupancy vis-a-vis safety standards in that building. And that, I think, is much better territory, really, for a city to regulate the same kind of concerns. Not that there aren't such concerns, a home that's really overloaded and doesn't have exit windows in the basement bedrooms, those kinds of things, but we know where to look for that, and it's a lot more objective. I believe the change here will be pretty simple, pardon me, to the definition, I think, for congregate care home and some others that will switch out the term family. And other cities that I work with have done that, and it's not been a problem. So.
You want to take questions on these one at a time, or do you want to wrap through the whole thing and then come back?
We're going to try to do one at a time and get consensus on each item.
Okay. So do we have questions on this item, which is really unrelated persons, residential occupancy limits? Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I've got 2 things I'd like to talk about on this one. The first one has to do with that, obviously, for us to enforce or try to enforce something that says, are the people living in this house related by family, would be next to impossible, and it just made sense and the voters told us that it was time to update our code. Just stepping one back before all this, though, one of the questions that come around every 10 years when there's a U.S. Census is how many people live in your house and what are their names? So the information about who's in the house, I believe, is available if we really wanted to look.
I think that it is, but I think what the state legislation is telling us is don't regulate from a zoning standpoint and health and safety standpoint based upon family relationship. That does not mean that family relationships aren't still important for other purposes, not least of which is the census. So I don't see any particular conflict between, that information being available. What do you use it for? Do you use it for the census and figuring that out, or do you use it to regulate how many people can be in the building? Yes to the first, no to the second. But information's powerful, but it's what you use it for that I think is fair game for the legislature to address. And in this particular arena, there are other arenas. When I worked at CML and sat in Heather Stauffer's seat years ago, we would really push back on things that really matters for local concern. I think it's much less so here.
Then the other question I have, I guess, has to do with, I guess it's unintended consequences, because just the other day, there was an article in the Colorado Sun about a situation in Grand Junction where you had looked like a nonprofit went and bought a fairly large house, something like 4,000 square feet. And the neighbors immediately started complaining about the people that were the men, it was all men, being dropped off by a sheriff's deputy in shackles and then moving into the home. Number of complaints about sleeping on the lawn and the curb, and it turned into it sounds like it's turned into a very big nuisance for the people in that neighborhood. And the point of the article was that this could be, or likely is, a consequence of the lack of ability of a municipality to enforce this sort of who lives in that house in a neighborhood. And again, I don't think that it's the city's responsibility to tell people that, who can live in your house, but in this case, where it becomes a nuisance to the neighborhood, are there some guardrails that we can think about for something like this?
Well, there are, and the city has a group home regulatory scheme that requires permitting for group homes for those purposes. And we are allowed to limit to a number, I forget what it is. And in fact, there have been group homes that the city has had to do enforcement on that are group homes for recovering addicts, alcoholics, other disabilities. And we've hewed pretty closely to numbers that are present in state statute for other types of group homes, developmentally disabled. I forget what the number is now. I used to have it just in my head all the time. 8, is it 8? It's 8. And there was a group home here that the city enforced against and had a transition program where they had too many people, and we were able to reduce those numbers over time. And it was actually a decision of the city manager, who has that authority, the enforcement authority, and we put together a series of conditions to kind of reduce that. So the city has powers around those kinds of group homes. Those individuals are protected by the ADA in terms of their ability to live in a residential neighborhood. They can't be zoned out of the neighborhood because of their disability, and we're careful to comply with the ADA in that regard. But there are upper limits that we can impose and some standards, although one needs to be careful about imposing standards. Okay, you've got too many cars parking in front of that house because it's a group home for recovering alcoholics. The house next door is peopled by my kind of, my heritage, Norwegians, and they all have a car, same number of cars. It's not appropriate to say, all right, group home for recovering alcoholics, you're limited to 3 cars. We frankly don't get into, and haven't ever gotten into how many cars can you have in front of your house? And if the city were to do that, and I'll shut up in a minute because we're slightly off the topic, but as you can tell, I'm familiar with this. If the city were to do that, it would need to regulate the number of cars you get to have across the board. And those Norwegians are going to have to cut their number of cars down to 7 or 5 or whatever, along with everyone else. And that, interestingly, is why you don't see those kinds of regulations out there. Honestly, if it were to become a problem, there are other tools. I know Denver, for example, had parking, and I think for a while here, parking permits on the street near the high school, on Federal Boulevard, because it's right next to the stadium. There were parking permits so that residents could still park there. The city has plenty of other tools, but it's no question that group homes raise issues, but the city here has navigated those, I think, appropriately.
Yeah, and sorry to expand on that real quick. We basically took the position that this state legislation does not impact our ability to regulate group homes. I think that article may have implied that it did. So that's at least our position. We could be wrong, but that's what we're taking.
Thank you. Councilor Rowland.
Thank you, Mayor. So about 10 years ago, when I was on the planning commission, I do recall that there was an issue. Can't remember which district it was in, but the issue was that there was, I don't recall it being a group home, but the neighbors were complaining. There was a lot of men going in and out, appeared to be unrelated, and the decision was for it to create the no more than 3 unrelated. That's what came out of that, and I don't remember any of the details. I got the impression that maybe it wasn't a group home. Was it? I don't know if it was religious, but that was the only one that I see that is maybe a little bit in the weeds, I guess, is like if it's not a registered religious, it's not a group home, and somebody, just has a lot of people coming in and out, I guess, is it a concern? Is it not a concern? When does the public say like, oh, it's okay, or when are they going to say like there's something maybe going on that I'm not comfortable with?
Well, it shouldn't be driven, and I think what the statute is telling us, outside of an ADA group home, we're covering developmentally disabled context, just too many people. That's addressed by occupancy limits and health and safety and fire requirements. And to be blunt, the fact that you might have 7 20-year-old guys in a house that are really going to behave differently than 7 family members or 7 other kinds of people is not a reason to say, okay, we're going to limit to X number of unrelated persons in a home. And in fact, that's what the statute's, really addressing, among other things, is these limitations of number of unrelateds. The fact that you're unrelated does not make you bad by itself. And I get it that families tend to behave differently in a home, but not always. And so I think wisely, the legislation and wisely the city's approach has been, we look at occupancy limits in terms of, do you have enough square feet for those persons? Are there exit windows from the bedrooms? Do we have fire safety in this building? And not at, well, who are you? And are you related to these people or not? And that's how we're going to decide if you can be there. Because we believe that if you're not related, you're going to be worse for the neighborhood. That may be true in some cases. I can't avoid those facts. But from a regulatory standpoint, the legislature is saying that that's not a place to go. And look at your occupancy limits in terms of square feet per person, fire code requirements, and that's your appropriate place to regulate.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you, Mayor. So I am in support of staff recommendations on this for a lot of the reasons that were just discussed. Council has taken this up a couple of times under my tenure. We've also strengthened our nuisance enforcement regulations. So if a household is a nuisance, whether it's 3 people, like the rental property across the street from me that was hugely problematic and they were related, that we have tools at our disposal. So I'm in support of this. It's bringing us into compliance with what our citizens said approved, and so I'm a yes on this.
So that's sort of a motion for consensus. Do we have
Yep.
consensus to move forward on that? Yes, we do, and we have one online. And hands up. Yep. Amanda's hands up. Okay. All right, let's move forward then. Minimum parking requirements.
Thanks. So the next two are a little bit more detailed, I think, in terms of discussion, what we're asking of council. I'll go ahead and start with parking and give an explainer of the bill. We'll move into some discussion, and then we have a few recommended changes, but we also have a few questions for council as well. Oh, you're just chips. Okay. Great. So the HB 24-1304 related to minimum parking requirements, it prohibits municipalities from enacting and enforcing minimum off-street parking requirements specifically for multi-unit residential developments within a applicable transit service area. This is a state-created term, and it means any area within a quarter mile of an existing rail or bus line within a 30-minute frequency. Touched a map, we can go through that in a little bit, that basically covers most of Wheat Ridge with the exception of a couple areas. And it covers like 95% of our areas that allow for multi-unit housing, so they're pretty well aligned. And I'll go through that in a little bit. This prohibition on parking would apply to any new multi-unit development that's fully residential or part of a mixed-use building. Then the residential portion does not have parking requirements. It also applies to adaptive reuse of an existing building if being converted to residential. What it does not apply to is any other type of development, including commercial, retail, restaurant, office, or other types of residential as well. So it's really only multi-unit. Does not prevent developers from providing parking. It just prohibits cities from requiring a specific minimum quantity of parking. Also doesn't change anything related to ADA, bicycle parking, loading requirements, or if we need to allow or require parking to meet affordable housing funding requirements. This bill does take effect fully in June of this year, June 30th. So it sounds like a pretty substantial change, right? Removing parking requirements for multi-unit residential sounds like a big change. But after a lot of research, we really do believe that there will be a limited impact at Wheat Ridge, specifically due to market forces. Parking is often necessary to make a project successful, especially in suburbia, and providing some parking reduces risk for developers. Some developers can't even get loans without providing parking. So that's kind of the market-based approach. We're also okay that the bill does not prohibit the city from allowing parking, and most developers will continue to elect to provide parking to ensure the desirability of the property to future tenants. Again, because parking is market-driven. More suburban development naturally provides more parking per unit than urban developments, as it's more likely that residents will own cars and need to drive. This does not prevent us from requiring ADA parking or bicycle parking to ensure accessibility is maintained. This discussion is happening tonight because of a change in state law, but these types of changes are something that staff has actually been talking about internally for a while. The market-based approaches to parking are increasingly common, not only in Colorado, but across the country. I think Lauren mentioned that, who is this? I forget his name.
One of the land use attorneys in the metro area, Don Elliott, he
Yeah.
likes to tell the story that half of cities in America have parking requirements and half don't. And you would never know which one was which because ultimately parking comes down to sort of the market. And we usually see parking in the end anyways.
Yeah. And, for example, the Ives Affordable Housing, they actually wanted to provide a smaller amount of parking, but still some parking for their residents. But they know the amount of parking they need to provide. Whereas a more suburban developer like Clear Creek Crossing that's interstate adjacent, they've elected to provide a lot of parking for their tenants, knowing that it's a more suburban area. So we already kind of see some of those market forces at play. One thing that's interesting about the bill is that it allows municipalities the discretion to define what multi-unit residential is within reason for the purposes of implementing the state law. And based on the state law and how it's written and the intent, we really believe that this applies only to typical apartment or condo developments. So think a walk-up apartment, wrapped building, any of those new build apartments, but not for townhomes. And the reason is that townhomes are separately owned on individual lots. They're fee simple, which means you own the land. And they actually function as single unit homes with a shared wall, both under building codes, but also how you actually own townhomes. So in other places in the code, they are kind of lumped into multi-unit residential, but we really do treat them as a separate category than a typical apartment building or apartment development. And so because the bill does not dictate specifically anything related to townhomes, we're actually recommending to update the code to consistently reference townhomes as single unit attached, like a single unit home, and then retain parking requirements for townhomes. So we would not be proposing to eliminate parking for townhomes. It would only be for apartments or condos. Just wanted to put this in here. We probably do need a larger discussion around parking for other types of uses at some point, especially for commercial. I know we approached council back in January 2023 about shared parking on commercial corridors and some of our challenges filling vacant commercial spaces on 29th and 38th. City plan might have some recommendations. So tonight's discussion, we really just want to focus on this narrow subset where we would need to exempt apartments and condo developments from these parking requirements. I do want to mention CML did oppose this bill throughout, although the bill was modified really significantly, more than I've seen any other bill modified that I've researched. The original bill was basically prohibited any parking requirements from being enforced, regardless of the use. And throughout the legislative session, you can see the bill getting amended, and they landed on this multi-unit housing, specifically tying into statewide housing and transit goals. So focused on transit corridors and focused on multi-unit housing. So we are, after all of this, recommending that we comply with the state legislation, specifically because we actually don't think it's going to impact too much in terms of what actually gets built. We would need to comply with the bill, we would need to update all the parking sections in the code to remove minimum parking requirements for multi-unit residential. We would need to refine how we refer to townhomes and single unit attached homes to make sure they're separate from that category. And then we would need to update our zoning requirements and charts to use consistent terminology throughout the code. So we are asking if council agrees with our approach to comply with the bill. And then we do have a couple additional questions for council related to the coverage, but I think we should probably start with discussion on the bill itself, and then we can move into questions if there is consensus. Anything else to add? Okay, yeah, let's take questions.
Let's start that discussion with Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for that. So one question I have is, has staff ever discussed about parking maximums? I know City of Fort Collins does parking maximums, so there's no minimums. I'm in support either way of how you want it right, but I'm just throwing that out there. And if that would help or not, I don't know what that perception would be. I got a couple questions, but if you could answer that one, would a developer feel more inclined to put like zero parking if we say no minimums versus the semantics of saying, well, here's a parking maximum? Does that change things, the perception?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the bill specifically allows cities to have maximums because what some cities don't want is overbuilding of parking where, an out-of-state developer may feel they need more parking than it's actually going to be utilized. We have parking maximums in our code currently in mixed-use zone districts, so specifically MUN and now the mixed-use Lutheran Legacy Campus. Those are still pretty wide range. I don't think we've discussed specifically if we wanted to expand those to other zone districts. I think that's a bigger discussion. There are probably some places where we wish we had parking maximums. Clear Creek Crossing might be a good example of, for commercial, we found that there's a substantial desire to build a lot of parking when we may not need it. But that hasn't come up in a residential context for other zone districts at this time.
And then the other thing that I think we should water is the having places, nice, like bike barns for the EV bikes. Especially if we're talking about getting rid of the parking minimums, it's like, let's change that behavior. How do we water that? It's like, well, you provide them a mandate of having these bike barns that now we can put, our nice bikes inside that. And it could be for non-EV bikes, but really watering that and as we're, looking at creating all this connectivity that, we've taken away having all these parking spaces, and now we have EV parking spaces. And I do think that is a trend that we really need to keep supporting. Thank you.
Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you. We're just passing the mic here. So first of all, I just really want to thank staff for their approach to this. The memos were just incredibly helpful and articulate and made it a lot easier. As someone who's actually familiar with these, I really appreciated the Wheat Ridge context. So I'm in support of removing our minimum parking. I really agree with the market-driven, having worked in real estate development for 17 years. I mean, everything that you mentioned is very true. Like the market really dictates it. And one thing I'm cognizant of is that in Wheat Ridge, we almost are two cities. There's like east of Wadsworth and west of Wadsworth. And we're a little bit more urban context east of Wadsworth and a little bit more suburban west of Wadsworth. And so sometimes when I think about setting policies around land use in our city, I'm really cognizant that I sometimes feel like we're talking about two cities. So anything that shifts that towards the developer to really look at what is that context and opportunity, I think we're really enabling that type of investment. And until we have construction defects resolved at the state level, we're talking about apartments, and they really do have to look at that long term. So I think we're really enabling developers to make market-based choices and not over-invest in parking. And we've said at this, in this council that affordable housing is a priority, and overbuilt parking actually works against our goal of affordable housing. So I am in support of removing the minimums, and I very much like Councilor Ohm's bringing up parking maximums. I don't think as part of this conversation we're equipped for that, but I'm really curious with city plan coming forward and some of the recommendations that come out of that. Could we be looking at some parking utilization studies? I do my own parking utilization audits as I drive around town, and we have an abundance of parking that is underutilized, and a lot of good uses for land. So those are my thoughts on kind of the bigger question. And since I have the mic, and I will try to not take it again, I am in support both of just the broader approach. So the question about should we not just take the transit corridors, but just do it citywide, I support that. And then I also support pivoting the definition of our EV requirements. And no one's going to be surprised to hear that I really like requiring electric bike barns with charging and protection. So that's all I've got to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional discussion. Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. Was trying to find what part of the code would we be looking at altering or amending?
It would mostly be 26-501, the parking section. And then there's some additional parking sections within the mixed use regulations as well.
Because if we could simplify that, it would certainly go a long way. Because it really isn't clear how things are differentiated. And well, all right, I'll simplify this question. If somebody's going to build 10 townhomes on a block, what is the parking requirement we have now?
It varies by zone district. I think for mixed use, where we see townhomes frequently, there's a required range of 1 to 2.5 per unit. we also are allowed by code to assess guest parking requirements if there's not other available on-street parking for guests. So it's a range. We generally see people provide about 2 per unit, 1.5 to 2.
So you provide the developer with, okay, you guys, this is the range, because the developer is looking at the math that says, okay, I've got this many acres, and I can build this many units, and if I think this is going to need 2 per unit, then, I've got to figure that in, and will that put him over the hurdle he has to cross? But then I look at Ward Station, and when you go out there to Ward Station on a Saturday morning, there is no parking at all on any of the streets. And whether, I'm not sure exactly what the townhouse requirements out there were, but it just seems like there's never enough parking out there. I'm going to leave it at that because there are some other issues around commercial parking that we can get into later.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
Councilmember Weaver does have a question.
Okay. Councilman Weaver has a question. We'd like to go to her now.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to follow up on what my colleagues have been saying, I do agree, and I do like these proposals, and I'm in favor of them. I was hoping that someone could speak to what do we require of the developer? Because to Dan's point, around me, there are several higher density, older apartment buildings, and there is not a lot of parking. And so people end up parking their second car on the streets. And of course, after 5 or after 6 or after 7, the streets are really full. And even in sort of the west side of Wadsworth. And I was just curious, whether it's a condo or an apartment, are there requirements? I mean, what sort of happens on the owner end of, okay, these are your spaces, you can only use this. But what stops a person from having a third or a fourth car? Just because we are in a Western city and we're in a suburb of a city, and I'm just, I think this is fantastic in concept. I think there are some areas around Wheat Ridge, however, that the parking is really a problem because it's already pretty dense already. So I don't know if any of you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think we have 2 different processes at play. It's similar to the occupancy. There's the regulations that come in when you're developing, and then there's the enforcement of a nuisance afterwards. So at the station area, for example, every one of those townhomes is a 2-car garage. We measure the width of the townhome to make sure we're not calling a 2-car garage when it's actually narrower. How somebody chooses to use their garage to store toys or vehicles is not something that is regulated by the zoning code or the nuisance code. So where there is on-street parking, we see it filled. And I think that's okay. The goal is to utilize the land that we decide to dedicate to vehicles. Similarly, we don't dictate in the municipal code how parking is assigned or paid for. We have periodically made sort of a friendly phone call to a new apartment building who's parking in a pickleball lot when we know that they have enough parking in their garage. But it's not something that we are actively regulating. So when a project comes to zoning, we're comparing the code requirements to the proposed requirements. To be completely honest, for residential projects, they are usually parking it based on their market study, their loan, and their design, and then making sure they fall within our range. We see the commercial developers significantly more aware of our code requirements when it comes to parking, just because folks, I think, tend to know who they're marketing to and how many cars folks have. I think periodically what we're seeing is tenants needing to be a little bit more aware of the leases that they're signing or the properties they're buying based on, the vehicles or other items that they'd like to store or park in their areas. So it's tricky. Some of it is zoning, which is how it's designed and built on the front end, and some of it is just sort of the evolution of a property's use and the folks who live there.
And I'll add, one thing we can require that this bill does not prohibit is for new development, we can require street improvements. So, if there's an unimproved street, they would still be required to build on-street parking. They'd still be required to build sidewalks and entrances to their development. So that's not changing. This is specifically talking about private property and regulations of private property.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. And I am in support of the staff recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you. Do we have the ability to regulate whether developers can charge extra for their parking, like for apartment buildings? Because I think what we've seen is that there's abundant parking built, and then the developers, the apartment operators are charging a lot of money for that. So the people living there are opting to not lease, but rather park in the neighborhoods instead. It doesn't sound like something, but I just want to bring it up because that's not, I mean, we can build as much parking as we want, but as long as they're doing that, it's going to drive people through the street.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of sort of what regulatory tools, we don't have, obviously, such a system. Trying to think of how you do that. You'd have to have a separate kind of rates ordinance, like you would regulate, trying to regulate rental, rental property rates. It would have to be, pardon me, it would have to be a regulatory scheme that is would be unusual for a city. Like saying, okay, you're in the tire business, here's the prices you can charge. That would be, I think it'd be really difficult. I don't know of any cities that do that. I'm trying to think, the hesitancy you're hearing is I'm really kind of ticking through the half dozen tools that we bring to bear on things like this and checking and saying, no, that one wouldn't fit and that one wouldn't fit. It'd have to maybe be adjunct to some other regulatory scheme we have, but I think it'd be hard to do. For example, rental rates are always challenged, or at least local regulation of rental rate schemes are always challenged by the private industry, and sometimes they succeed from just a sort of anti-competitive defense. So I think that'd be tough.
Could maybe come at it from a different direction though, and have permit street parking so that people can park there, or 2-hour parking, but we'd have to force that, right? So I think maybe there's other ways to get to that.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily proposing that's something we tackle, but I just want to say we can be having this discussion, and those building operators could be making the choice to charge too much for the spaces they own, and they'll still park on our streets. So, and to Councilmember Weaver's point, I'd actually forgotten this, but over the weekend, anticipating this, every time I walked the dog, I was just paying attention to my neighborhood, to what the parking. I live in R2, but it's predominantly single-family homes. A lot of them are brick, like mid-century ranches. Excuse me. And I would say probably about a quarter of them don't have any garages, like attached or detached. And by that, I mean they've converted their garage at some point to a livable space. And then, so they are parking in their driveway and parking on the street. And then I'd say about another half of my neighbors either can't fit their oversized truck into their small garage. And so they're parking on the street in the driveway, or they are storing so much or using their garage for an auxiliary use. So I just want to say, like, we're talking predominantly about like the impact of an apartment building, but like within the neighborhoods, this is like an equivalency issue that is driven by some of the individual choices that people are making. And we are a community flush with houses that were not built with parking for modern times. So whatever developers do moving forward, they're probably doing better than most of my neighbors' builders did in the 50s. So, and just a reminder, people have the right to park on the street. We built our streets for parking. So I know not everybody loves that, but that is part of the public use of the street. So thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. And we just heard that the a townhome developer that is looking at a new project will be told that he or she will be asked to produce between 1 and 2 off-street parking places per unit. Do I understand that about right?
Yes, the townhome requirement ranges from 1 to 3-ish parking spaces per unit.
And we are now looking at differentiating
Yes.
multifamily developments and condominiums, which are typically multifamily. What would that look like? How would it be different from the townhome requirement?
Per the state law, we'd have no minimum parking requirement for the apartments, but we'd retain our minimum of 1 per unit for townhomes.
Yeah, we're not proposing to change anything about townhomes. It would specifically be the apartment that the state bill addresses.
Right. So what we're saying is that if a developer wants to come in and build a multi-family building at near, shown on the map here, in one of those areas, they would not be required to provide off-street parking.
By the
I'm
city.
trying to just state as clearly as I
Correct.
can.
Yeah, so
That's correct, yes.
they would be allowed to provide parking, but they could
But they
dictate
wouldn't
that
be
amount.
required to
Correct.
provide parking.
Yeah.
Do we anticipate any, because I can, right off the top of my head, come up with a couple of scenarios where the people that live across the street or down the block are going to be upset with a plan to do something like that. Can we think about some sort of maybe a process that provides a parking study or some sort of a relief or something for the neighborhoods? Because if a project is looking to build a fairly large building that will have parking, because we've acknowledged that as a suburban area, people will be driving their cars. How do we accommodate neighbors who have lived there for a long time and they now see their ability to park in front of their home taken away?
So I think it sounds very scary. I don't think we'll get a big apartment building with no parking. We know we have people in the queue with apartment projects and they're not clamoring to get rid of their parking. If it does become an issue, or if there's a certain context where it's an issue, we do have an ability in the code. It's outside the zoning code, but our engineering and police departments administer a parking permit system. We typically only have them by our schools, but we could, expand that tool if we ever needed to.
Thank you. Counselor Snell.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to go back. You mentioned the Ives and their parking lot is smaller. Is that correct? Are they elected to not have the same number of parking spots, I guess, allocated?
Yeah, so to give some background on that, the Ives is considered a deed restricted affordable, and I think 2 years ago now, we amended our code to lower parking requirements. We actually approached council and planning commission at that time to eliminate them, and that was not the direction that we ended up taking. But they had a reduced parking requirement of 0.75 per unit. Now the parking requirement is 0.5 per unit, and I actually spoke with the manager of that property the other day, and they have a parking utilization rate of like less than half of that parking. So they actually, if they could have chosen, they would have built less, as long as they're meeting the minimum funding requirements from the feds or CHAFA for affordable housing. They would actually elect to provide less because they actually felt that our regulations were still too burdensome on that. But that's a specific use case where the vast majority of the residents do not have cars.
That was going to be my next question, is what is their use, or what does it look like now? So that's great. And that's more so because transit is vastly used by those residents, correct? Or I'm
I think that's one reason. Yeah, there's a multitude.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this? I don't see any. At the bottom of page 5, staff is recommending three recommendations. You can take a look at those quickly again to refresh your mind. And then does council agree with staff's recommendations to make these changes to comply with state regulations. Do we have consensus on that? Seems as we do, and our online, yes, okay, seems that we do. Okay, we got that one done.
Yeah, so thank you, Mayor. We do have a couple of additional questions on this one now that we have
Okay.
consensus, because there are a couple ways we can approach this. And Councilor Hulteen brought up question one, which is there's this transit service areas map where the legislation applies. Map 2, which is the city's zoning, where apartments are allowed R3, MUN, MUC, for example. Those areas almost fully align. And so I think our recommendation would be that it's simpler to exempt all multi-unit residential from the requirements rather than applying separate rules for areas inside and outside the transit service areas. If there's any questions on that, let me know, but that's our recommendation just based on the maps. And we also don't anticipate areas further away from transit seeing multi-unit housing. A lot of it's our R1 series or Crown Hill Park, but you can kind of see it covers basically all of East Wheat Ridge, Clear Creek Crossing, and the transit area.
So if we could have a discussion and consensus on that specific nuance so that we
Yes.
know how to write our code language, that would be helpful.
Thanks.
I had a question before, then I'm going to come to you next. On the 30-minute frequency in state statute, is that 30 minutes on it for 24 hours?
I don't have the exact how that was defined, but it's within transit service hours. So it may vary depending on the transit line. That's not something that came from staff.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Larson?
Thank you, Mayor. And just so I'm as clear as I can possibly be with this, when we're talking about exempting all multi-unit residential projects that come in, we're assuming that they will also all be along corridors. And I can't think of an area in the city that is already zoned for multi-unit residential that's not. Do you guys know of any?
You're right. Because of the preponderance of bus service on the east side of Wheat Ridge in particular, where we have more R3 zoning in our neighborhoods, we don't have the their map layer to overlap onto our zoning, but based on our analysis, you're right. It looks like nearly, if not all, zoning that is eligible for multifamily is covered by this transit service area map.
And we don't anticipate that anybody's going to come in and say, I'd like this area, that's a good mile away from the nearest road to be rezoned for multi. Because they don't exist now, right?
Yeah, you're correct. I think in the areas that are not covered by the transit map, so just south of 70, that is under our 44 sub-area plan, and that gives us the policy guidance to say if you're going to have redevelopment there, it needs to be compatible, so we would expect it to be more duplexes or townhomes. So I think we'd all be a little surprised if somebody found a little wedge where an apartment building would be an appropriate zone change outside of these boundaries.
And we would still need to follow our comprehensive plan too, which
Right.
wouldn't really call for that in such a far away area.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
Consensus on that.
All right, so this was question number 1 on page 6. Do we have consensus to move forward with that recommendation?
Sorry, we're consenting to number 1 and not number 2.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So it looks like we do have consensus on that. Now, number
Thank
2,
you.
please.
Yeah, number 2 is a little bit simpler, hopefully. But last year, maybe 2 years ago now, we passed the EV parking regulations, which were based on the state model codes. And we based those on the overall number of required parking spaces. But because what we didn't want is to overly burden a developer or someone trying to invest in their property, provide like way more EV parking than they could possibly afford. So we based it on the required, which is typically the lower number. But since parking is now not required or will not be required, to meet the intent of that legislation in our code, we still need to do something. So the thought here is to switch it to be based on the amount of provided parking spaces, so that we can still have some EV parking being provided by new developments. So we're seeking council consensus on that switch, and then we would proceed.
Question, Councilor Larson?
Thank you, Mayor. What's the difference between a provided space and required space?
That's a good question. So our code would require a minimum, currently our code would require a minimum number of parking spaces. And so if it's, I don't know, let's say our code would require 200 parking spaces for this apartment building, that's the required number. And the EV parking right now is based on that number. But, you know, a developer might say, well, I want to build 350 spaces instead of 200. We would still base it on the lower required number, not the excess amount of parking that they're being provided. Because that would also increase their EV parking requirements.
So the number doesn't move in lockstep with the number that they're going to provide?
Currently, yes. Now it would if we go with this recommendation, only because the required number would now be 0. And so to meet this spirit of still providing EV parking, we have to base it on something. So it would go back to the number of spaces that are actually built.
And what we're asking is that a percentage of the number of spaces that are going to be provided are dedicated for EV.
Correct, yes.
And if they say, I'm putting in a 50-unit apartment building, and I'm going to provide one per unit, one off-street per unit, just offhand, then a percentage will be of that. But
correct.
But if he says, to your point, I'm going to provide 100 spaces, it wouldn't necessarily have to increase.
It would under the new recommendation.
It would.
Only because we have to base the requirement on something. And if at this point, if someone is voluntarily providing a large amount, I mean, we have to base the requirement on something. If we're requiring 0 parking, then we would also be requiring 0 EV, which defeats the purpose of the EV legislation.
Yeah, so presently, the EV requirement rides up and down with the number that it's required. But if you don't have a requirement, and you have to attach something, so the EV requirement would ride up and down with the number chosen by the developer to provide.
Is it something that there will be some spaces provided? I mean, well, maybe there will be a building that goes up that has no off-street parking.
Conceivably, unlikely,
Yeah,
especially the larger.
I'm always
that it
looking at
gets.
it, the exceptions that could come up.
The larger the commercial and the larger the multifamily, the more likely they are to exceed our minimum requirements today. So.
Okay. Realistically, then, yeah.
Yeah. And what we've seen so far is nobody has provided EV parking without it being required. So we feel confident that would diminish substantially if we didn't change this approach.
Councilor Holmes?
Hypothetically, if imagine the smallest possible multi-use apartments, and that they don't want to put any parking whatsoever because they don't have to. And first question is would that be compliant with ADA? Because now there's no ADA parking next to the apartments. And number 2, I'm assuming that because we want to put in EV parking, there would have to be ADA EV parking as well. So what it sounds like is that there would be a bare bone minimum at any rate, right?
Potentially, yeah. I talked to Renee about this a little bit. If there's 0 parking, like 0 parking, then there's no ADA parking requirement. If there's 1 parking, then that is ADA. So the same logic would apply to EV as if you're being required to provide 1 EV space, then it's also the only parking space that's EV. So, yeah, a little confusing, but that's ADA relies on having parking in the first place, and we know that there's buildings that have no parking and they have no ADA.
Hey, Mr. Dahl, I just had a theoretical question for you. Could we construct an ordinance that if we had zero parking requirements, to require EV charging based on a previous requirement of the code, what was in effect at this time here, so that you'd have a reference back to the math?
Might be able to if you characterize it as EV charging stations. It's not parking right now. But effectively you get parking, but that's how I do it.
Okay.
To respond to that hypothetical, I think it's all about terminology then, right?
Right.
So we're not requiring parking because we can't. We're requiring EV charging as a part of this development. And that might have a ripple effect probably would, parking space so that you can park your EV car there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lauren, you mentioned earlier that the new buildings being built, if we weren't requiring EV, they probably wouldn't put them in. What's the reason for that? Because we've talked about the market kind of determining parking spaces, all that stuff. Why wouldn't they want to put them in?
Yeah, that's a good question. The market-based parking approach assumes that most of the potential tenants for a building have a vehicle, but I think they're agnostic as to whether or not they need to accommodate the charging component of the vehicle. And because EV infrastructure is an added cost and parking stalls already cost between $3,000 and $30,000 per stall, they have not been motivated nor have they needed to provide the charging component in order to lease up the building. They usually do need to provide some parking, basic parking to lease up the building.
And I think there have been a couple developments that have put in some EV, but obviously not at the rate that our code would currently require. It's much less.
Thank you.
This is on question number 2 on page 6 concerning EV parking based on the overall numbers. Does council agree with this recommendation for procedure? We do? Thank you. And okay, good. All right. Mr. Cutler, continue on.
Great. Thank you. The last one for tonight is the accessory dwelling units bill, House Bill 241152. We talked about this a little bit back in June when the legislation was just passed. And since then, we've done more research and had a little bit more lessons learned on our own implementation of our current ADU ordinance. And some additional guidance has been released. So the list to discuss actually has gotten a lot shorter as we found we're in compliance with more of the bill than I originally thought, which is good. So this bill does require that municipalities allow ADUs on properties containing a single unit home through an administrative approval process. We already do that as of August 2022. This bill also includes provisions ensuring communities are not being overly restrictive on ADUs, and it takes effect in June 30th of this year. This bill is one where we have required reporting, and we will be required to submit a report demonstrating compliance to the state by that date. So we talked about this a little bit in the June study session last year, but we are really largely in compliance with the bill. There are only now 3 provisions where we partially comply, and I think we're not too far off, honestly. Size of the ADU, owner occupancy, and planned developments. So size of the ADU I did bring up last time. This bill requires that ADUs are always allowed between 500 and 750 square feet in size to ensure that an ADU is large enough to accommodate 1 bedroom and an adequate kitchen and bathing facilities. So our current restrictions are based on the size of the primary dwelling unit. An ADU is limited to 50% of the square footage of that primary dwelling, or 1,000 square feet, whichever is less. That ensures that the ADU is smaller than the main house. But what we missed and what the state is attempting to correct here is that we have a lot of really small homes in Wheat Ridge where people are still interested in investing in ADUs. And for example, in East Wheat Ridge, you might have a house that's under 1,000 square feet, which means you have an ADU that might be 300, 400 square feet. That's enough for some people, but it's not enough for everyone to fit in a bedroom, a bathroom, and a kitchen and have adequate living space. So to comply with the state law, our code would need to be changed to allow that Still small ADU, but a range of at least 500 to 750 square feet in size in all instances. The only time we could then limit that further is if we limit the maximum size to be no larger than the house. So if the house is 800 square feet, we could limit it between 500 and 750. If the house is 750, then it's 749. But what we can't do is prohibit an ADU within that 500 to 750 range. We looked into it. We've had no concerns with these changes. We've seen ADUs kind of approved wide size range. I think one I'm reviewing right now is about 300 square feet, but they're electing to do more of a studio apartment. We've also seen people run into that issue of struggling to find space for an ADU because their house is so small, and some people have even considered adding on to their house in order to make up space in the ADU, and that feels like a pretty big burden. So even though it's coming from the state, I think that's something that we've analyzed as well and really don't have any concerns with. So I think what I'll do with ADUs is we'll just get general consensus because we are going to recommend complying with all of the changes at the end. But we can kind of break up the discussion later if we need to. Owner occupancy. So the state bill generally prohibits owner occupancy requirements for ADUs with the goal of removing barriers to ADU construction and financing. We currently require owner occupancy demonstration for all ADUs by recording a deed restriction against the property, stating that the owner must live either in the primary dwelling or the ADU. And the bill prevents a blanket approach to owner occupancy and instead breaks it into 3 different scenarios. So for new single unit home being constructed concurrently with the new ADU, so new development basically, cities can no longer require owner occupancy. For an ADU being used as a short-term rental, cities can enforce owner occupancy, and we currently do, so we're good there. The last scenario is for a new ADU being constructed on a lot with an existing house that's currently occupied. Cities may require evidence of owner occupancy only at time of application. So we can't enforce owner occupancy after a permit is issued and deed restrictions aren't allowed, but we can still ask for it at time of application, and that would apply to the existing ADU category as well. We are really needing to discuss that third scenario because the alternative is to just eliminate the owner occupancy requirement altogether. Wanted to put this in here because we do recognize, staff recognizes that this was a really big part of the original 2022 ADU ordinance. We know that this was really important to everyone. Now we've been allowing ADUs for almost a little over 2.5 years and approving ADU applications with all the deed restrictions in place. And we have some lessons learned. It's been a lot. We've approved a lot of ADUs. They have still not proliferated widely. And we really believe that without an owner occupancy requirement, they would still not continue to proliferate widely due to cost mostly. It's expensive to build an ADU. Tap fees and labor alone are really high. And so it's going to take a special type of property owner to want to build an ADU in the first place. In practice, with these deed restrictions, it's been hard to track down property owners to get them to sign. Some have been hesitant. And then after the fact, it's impossible to enforce owner occupancy requirements, especially after a property is sold. That would require going to the house and saying, are you the owner of this property and are you living in one of the units? And as we talked about earlier, that can be a big challenge. I think similar to parking, this is something that we've been thinking about and have likely made a similar recommendation at some point in the future based on just the past few years of regulating ADUs. The state obviously has put us on a timeline, but I think it's something that we were already talking about internally of being a challenge. And it is always good to revisit legislation after implementation to see if things are working and if things aren't working, just like we've done with short-term rentals now a couple of times. So we are recommending retaining the owner occupancy requirements for short-term rentals in compliance with state law and what we're already doing. Although the state allows the city to ask for proof of owner occupancy at time of permit for a new ADU on a lot with an existing house, it really may not be necessary anymore, and it likely does not achieve the city's original policy intent was to do a full deed restriction. This is just a point in time, do you occupy the property, yes or no, here's your permit. We can no longer do the deed restriction. So more to discuss, and we have a question on that, but That's kind of the background of why we've shifted our approach. Okay, one more quick one related to planned developments. So the bill does require ADUs to be allowed in existing planned developments where single unit dwellings are allowed. In effect, this treats planned developments the same as a standard zone district. So if a planned development allows a single unit home, it must also allow ADUs. Our current regulations require this for new planned developments, but we did not apply that retroactively. We don't really actually have any concerns with this change. ADUs in the planned developments, existing planned developments, would still be required to meet the development standards of that district where they're located, including setbacks, height restrictions, and reasonable design standards if applicable. We don't think that this will really have a large impact. I don't think we've actually gotten that question before, but it is something where if someone lives in a planned development, they should be afforded the same opportunity to build an ADU as someone that's not in a planned district. So just to give a quick background on this, CML took the position of oppose unless amended. And they did legislatively, they lobbied the legislature pretty substantially along with some municipalities to modify portions of the bill to allow for some flexibility and local control. So for example, the original bill had a blanket prohibition on owner occupancy, and now it's that kind of 3-tier system. They still did oppose unless amended, specifically related to local control on this one, same as the parking. Recommended code changes. So to comply with the House bill, we would need to change the code, specifically the ADU section, to comply with the size restriction requirement. We would need to update owner occupancy requirements, continuing to require owner occupancy for short-term rentals, and modify some other requirements. And I've got one question on that, question 1 below. And then lastly, we would need to update the planned development section related to existing planned developments. So seeking consensus, we want to see if council agree with our approach to comply with the House bill. And then if you do agree with the approach, there are questions below regarding the owner occupancy requirements and if you want to ever request owner occupancy for that narrow case where we can. So yeah, discussion, questions. Thanks.
Councilor Rome.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Scott. That was a good presentation. First question is, are duplexes allowed in R1 zones?
No, they're not. And ADUs are not allowed with duplexes either.
But they would be, what we're proposing, they would be allowed in all districts, right? The ADUs would be allowed in all districts?
No, the state legislation mirrors ours where they're only required to be allowed with a single unit home as an accessory use. So it's not expanding where ADUs would be permitted.
So on a R1 with a single family home, it could have an ADU?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and so I also saw that it said that the ADU maximum size could be limited to the maximum size of the primary dwelling, right?
Correct, yes.
So what I've seen in Denver, which is interesting, is that they're doing, it's called I don't know what the word is, but it's a detached duplex on one property. So what I'm asking theoretically is could you check the box and say maximum size, same as the primary, it's in an R1. We've now created an ADU, check the box, but it looks like a detached duplex on an R1.
Yeah. So what we didn't do is summarize all of our other regulations. We talked about detached duplexes actually the very first time we brought ADUs into here a couple of years ago. They have their merits in a different context. Our limitation on an ADU being limited to 50% of the size of the single unit home still applies. The only time where we have to modify our size standards is if the home is so small, it would result in such a tiny ADU, we have to allow it to be a little bigger. So the scenario that you describe of a big home in an R1, they'd still have, the ADU could never be more than half the size of the home. So I think our rules are just a little different than Denver's. Detached duplex, we can bring, is a discussion sort of with the city plan of like, are there other ways we want to introduce alternative housing options in our neighborhoods?
and I'm not necessarily, I just want to have the discussion. I'm not necessarily saying I'm 100% opposed to the detached duplex, but I just want to kind of vet that out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
that's
different housing type, and I think something we will bring with sort of a suite of alternate housing types and how we can sort of massage some of our series zoning based on the city plan, but it wouldn't change likely the ADU approach.
Right, and a duplex also would allow the unit to be sold separately, whereas ADU is always held within the same ownership. So that's not changing.
That was a big concern of mine too, if it's going to be separate, it could be sold later. So thank you for that. And then my comment is that I think originally, when we did the crafting of the ADU, it was something new, and the sentiment was that owner occupied. And I think that was good. I felt like that was what I would kind of call training wheels. There was other groups that were saying, I know like the AARP, like, hey, you should not do that, but I felt like this is something new. And if what I'm hearing from staff is, that we haven't had a lot of issues, I feel like I might be okay with taking the training wheels off and changing that, that it's done its job. Thank you.
Councilor Hulteen.
Thanks. I have a question. So I just want to clarify that the 500 to 1,000 square feet is establishing a property owner's right to build at least a 500 square foot. But if I wanted to still build my 350 square foot ADU, I would be allowed to.
Correct, yes, we're not proposing to eliminate sizes
Tiny,
smaller. We're just
itty-bitty.
saying you have the right to build this middle size. And we're also not proposing to increase either. So the range would be still up to 1,000.
It's just guaranteeing like a minimum of 500 square
Exactly.
feet, independent of the size of the principal property.
And that's kind of based on a habitability of like a one bedroom kind of needs to be 500, a two bedroom kind of needs to be 750. So there's that range where it's actually a viable dwelling unit.
Wonderful. So I'm in support, and I'll just say that much to Councilor Ohm's comments, when we first started this, we were not sure what ADUs, how they would play out. And first of all, just like the sheer number of them is not going to be huge in the near term. At some point, that might be different. So we're not really talking about substantial impact on the character of our community. And I also, when I hear that it's really hard to enforce, I think something I've increasingly become mindful of as a city councilor is to not push things that are unenforceable. So just to have a regulation for the idea of it as opposed to the ability to actually enforce it doesn't translate well for me. So I support removing the owner occupancy. Thanks.
Scott, I had a question, and I'll get to you. Let me go back to this a minimum size. State law requires that municipal code would need to be changed to allow an ADU of at least 500 to 750 square feet. Now, my first question there was, why would there be two numbers there? I mean, either the minimum size would be 500 square feet, right?
Yes, but the law is talking about a range, so we would be required to allow the range between 500 and 750.
The minimum size would be 500 square feet.
Right.
I mean, what other number in there makes any sense if
I
that's the
think it's
minimum?
because we are okay with a smaller ADU, right? So if somebody chose to build a 300 square foot ADU, that's okay. So it's
Well, that was my second question, does that comply with state law to build a 300 square footer?
yes, so the ADU has what would inform the true minimum size of an ADU is the building code, which sets minimum square footages for bedroom, bathroom, cooking facilities. Zoning regulations are always sort of a layer on top of the building code. And in some communities, they do dictate the minimum size of a house because they don't want tiny houses and they don't want diversity of housing types. So I think the goal was to say, we're going to ignore how you community choose to enforce anything smaller or bigger and just tell you, you have to at least allow this size, which generally accommodates a 1 to 2 bedroom ADU. It's awkward. It's definitely awkward. Layering house legislation over our zoning code is always a bit of a linguistic gymnastics, but I think will stick to their language so that we can demonstrate that we are affirmatively in compliance with what they've dictated.
And you may have been asking, well, why did they bother with the 750? Why
Well,
not
that was
just-
why I was asking. If
Yeah.
500 is the
Yeah.
minimum, 500 is
Yeah.
the minimum.
And, you know, that's the legislature, and having been there, I'll tell you that, they had in their heads that, gosh, there could be, you know, if it's got to be at least 500, then we don't want cities capping it at 600 for some strange reason. They didn't have the benefit of what Scott has just talked about, which is if you want to do a one bedroom, you're really going to be around 500. If you want to do two, it's going to be around 750.
Okay.
They
I
didn't
mean,
have the benefit of
and
that
that's to
expertise.
Lauren's point that the geography of the layout of the unit is going to dictate that it becomes 500 feet or more. Okay.
And the legislature's created sort of a safe zone in their heads.
Okay.
For that kind of housing.
I didn't want to put too much logic into that. So thank you.
No, you shouldn't on this one, yeah.
Okay, so the time runs late, so are there any more questions on this? Okay, so we have recommendations on page 8 in the center, 3 bullets there. And does staff agree to that approach? We have consensus on that? We do, okay. And then we had a follow-up question for scenario number 3, and I think that was back on the other, on page 7, scenario number 3, the third bullet. Their options. Scott, once again, articulate what the question is.
Thanks. Yeah, so the question here, there's this narrow use case where we are still allowed to ask for owner occupancy proof, and that is that scenario 3 where a new ADU is being constructed on a lot with an existing house that is currently occupied. So a pretty narrow use case, but don't really totally understand the intent there. But there's really 2 options there. We can request proof of owner occupancy at time of permit and deny applications on properties that are not owner occupied at that point in time. Or we can remove owner occupancy requirements altogether since they cannot be enforced after owner issuance. Our recommendation is removing them altogether, just to ensure the barriers are removed and allow reinvestment. And this also may help legalize properties with existing ADUs where owners may be cautious to come forward if the property is not owner occupied. That is definitely a category of ADU in the city. And again, I think we think ADUs will still not widely proliferate if we go with option B. So happy to take questions on that.
Okay, Councilor Larson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just so I understand, when we talk about removing the requirement for owner occupancy in order to issue a permit, this is across the board, including the short-term rentals?
No, it would just be.
It would not include.
We would, correct.
Short-term rental, as we see here in bullet number 3, would stay in place.
Exactly, yes. That was really important to us and something we're allowed to do as well.
And the requirement for owner occupancy becomes part of it. Is it a deed restricted after that, or?
So we're no longer allowed to require deed restrictions. I think this would be, if we go with option A, it would be demonstrating that they occupy the property currently at time of application. And then after that, we do not look at it at all. So it's a very narrow window where we are allowed to ask for that scenario. I think the only thing that comes to mind is maybe like a fix and flip where they're not occupying the property and you don't want that type of development, but it's a pretty narrow use case for why we would ask at that point.
If they're talking about building a short-term rental?
Well, and in that case, we would require the property to be owner occupied in order to receive the short-term rental license. So if it was going to become a short-term rental, there would be other places in our code that would still require to be owner occupied.
Okay, how do we feel about that? Yes, consensus on that? On the question.
Remove owner occupancy except for short-term.
Yeah, the option B, I think, is what, yeah. I think we would want to see consensus on option B if council agrees.
So consensus for option B?
Consensus for option B. Okay, it looks like we have consensus for option B.
All right, we're almost there. So the other half of the ADU bill is related to the ADU supportive jurisdiction. This should be pretty quick. Council did give initial consensus at the June 3rd study session to release staff to look into us becoming an ADU supportive jurisdiction. It requires cities that intend to become an ADU supportive jurisdiction to adopt our requirements of the bill. Sounds like we're on board with that, so that's one barrier removed there. There were those 10 strategies that we talked about last time. Nothing has really changed. And council previously gave consensus to at least explore items E, F, H, and I, so that kind of towards the bottom there. We did want to say we are somewhat implementing strategies A, B, and C to varying degrees of effectiveness and success. Wanted to just reconfirm council's desire to pursue those. We don't fully know the implications of exploring all of those or adopting those measures, specifically from a cost and staff resourcing standpoint, but we're still happy to look into them and pursue the implications of those strategies if council reaffirms that or wants to add or remove any of those other strategies from the list.
And the benefits, Scott, of being a supportive jurisdiction.
Good. Yeah, good question. So we do get some funding from this ordinance that was actually put into law, I believe, for 5 years. And then after that, I'm not sure. But we get some funding to actually support some of those programs. So if you intend to adopt them and we put them in our strategy as we're starting to work on them, we could potentially receive funding from the state to potentially, for example, waive permit fees or fund pre-approved plans, which we know will cost money. So you kind of have to commit and then you get the money. But the bill is fully funded currently, from my understanding.
The bill is totally funded?
At least through, I don't remember, it was at least one first few years, yeah.
$1 billion.
Well, until they, until they read the budget message that's going
Yeah.
out today.
It was when the bill was passed.
Okay, is there discussion on this item? Councilor Hulteen.
Thanks, I'll be quick. So just to clarify, Scott, to be eligible for the funding, we have to enact just one of those? Like what makes us eligible? Can you just clarify? Sorry, you may have said
It's at least one. My understanding, though, is the more you adopt, the more competitive you are.
Okay.
In order to ensure that we're actually fully committed.
Okay. Well, so I mean, I love all of them. I think I would be okay with pulling H from the list, which is the pre-approved plans. I just feel like everyone's going to have like such unique needs and that there's a lot of actual like online plans that you can get. I would much rather we're focusing on like prefabricated ADUs, which I think would actually be more substantial reduction in cost than the pre-approved plans. So I would be okay if we took that off the list for staff consideration, but still very much support the other three.
Mr. Larson?
Thank you, Mayor. First off, providing support for building permit fees for low-income and moderate-income families makes a whole lot of sense when we've had this discussion about what our building permit fees are now for people that are doing their own work. And I think that'll be a discussion for another day. My concern is, again, on the pre-approved plans, I agree with Councilor Hulteen that we may want to be careful how we address that, particularly when we talk about reviewing a plan that gets a pre-approved plan submitted. And I don't know, it just seems like there's it's some kind of a minefield there. The concern I have, the biggest concern, is prefabricated ADUs. And without any sort of definition of what a prefabricated ADU looks like, I don't know, I have trouble supporting that one. Because prefabricated ADU can be a shipping crate. It can be anything from a park model RV to a fully built out designed building. So until we come up with some definitions around what a prefabricated ADU looks like, I won't be able to support that one.
Additional discussion?
Councilmember Weaver has a question.
Councilmember Weaver.
No, she's changed her mind. No.
Okay. Okay, so do we have consensus to add any of these? Let's see if we add E. Is there consensus to add E? Okay, so it looks like E is okay. F is, let's see, F is enacting local laws that incentivize the construction and conversion of ADA accessible and visitable ADUs. So we want to enact some more laws, okay? And then providing pre-approved, this is H, providing pre-approved plans for construction of ADUs. Nope, not there. And I, enacting laws that encourage prefabricated ADUs. Four.
Amanda's yes.
Amanda's yes, so five. So we're gonna make some more laws there, okay?
Just investigating these items, not changing anything, so.
Okay,
Yes, investigating.
okay. What else, Scott?
That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Staff reports?
Nothing else this evening, thank
Okay.
you.
Public epistles? Okay, we are adjourned.
That's the quickest adjournment I've ever seen.
No, I